S-rank adventurers were legendary figures possessing immense power, capable of commanding entire legions and reshaping the destiny of the world. Among these rare individuals stood a solitary warrior who devoted his life to his unique path, Egil Volts. At the bustling slave auction in Krishna town, the auctioneer's call echoed loudly over the crowd, securing a winning bid of 420,000 gold to a thunderous round of applause. Amidst the commotion, his ally Jessendorf turned to query his opinion on the slave market while they observed a newly bound captive wearing a heavy iron restraint on stage. He remained impassive as Jessendorf inquired if he harbored a distaste for slavery, responding with a simple, quiet affirmation. His companion pointed out the irony of bringing him along despite that sentiment, prompting him to reiterate that trading human lives was something he found inherently repulsive. As Jessendorf suggested that acquiring domestic help for his residents would make sense given his demanding career, he reaffirmed his disgust for the practice, leading his ally to change the subject to his recent solo triumph. The topic shifted to a terrifying quest that had terrified the local guild for so long that the client had almost abandoned all hope of finding anyone brave enough to accept it. Yet despite the overwhelming threat presented by the massive horned beast, he had marched into battle completely alone and subdued the creature with decisive force. He was accustomed to praise, having recently slain a massive monster single-handedly, a feat worthy of an S-rank adventurer that left his companion Jessendorf in utter awe. Unmoved by the recollection of his legendary prowess, he let out a bored yawn and expressed a keen desire to leave, ignoring his companion's insistence that the auction's main event was about to begin. When his companion comically misconstrued his apathy as a preference for men, he swiftly clarified that he possessed no interest in men whatsoever, maintaining his impassive demeanor. Their banter was cut short as the auctioneer stepped up to the stage, grandly declaring to the eager crowd that the final and most anticipated offering of the day was about to be presented. The host extolled the physical perfection of the captive woman, emphasizing her young age of 20, her divinely beautiful countenance, and her voluptuous figure restrained in heavy iron chains. An electric wave of excitement surged through the audience as the chained beauty was displayed on stage, sending loud murmurs and cheers echoing across the grand hall. The auctioneer continued his theatrical pitch, boasting that despite her past life as a skilled adventurer, she remained pristine and untouched, a revelation that piqued the crowd's fervor even further. Upon taking a closer look at her face, his detached composure suddenly vanished, a look of quiet shock sweeping over his features as he truly recognized her. Her luminous eyes gazed silently into the crowd, carrying a tragic mix of vulnerability and quiet dignity beneath her bondage. He remained locked in intense scrutiny, his gaze firmly anchored on the captive woman who stood before the ravenous crowd, bound yet serene. He watched intently as the auctioneer opened the bidding at 6 million gold, watching the numbers climb rapidly higher as wealthy buyers vied for the captive princess. Amidst the clamor of soaring bids and Jessendorf's visible disbelief, he suddenly shattered the contest with a staggering offer of 10 million gold. Raising a single hand with calm authority, his voice resounded over the gasps of the surrounding crowd, freezing the entire room in stunned silence. Following his massive declaration, murmurs swept through the gallery as spectators whispered about his formidable presence, even as one reluctant bidder desperately stammered out 11 million gold. Without a moment's hesitation, he instantly shut down the opposition by countering with a staggering 13 million gold, leaving the auctioneer breathless and his companion in absolute shock. With a sharp strike of the wooden gavel, the transaction was finalized for a historic sum, officializing his purchase of the captive maiden. Sometime later, in the quiet alleyways outside the auction hall, the newly acquired noblewoman bowed deeply before him, offering her formal gratitude for purchasing her freedom. Introducing herself as Eleanor, she curtsied with gentle grace while he questioned her about returning her share of the astronomical sum he had paid. Continuing their walk side by side along the paved streets, he inquired into the strange contract she had made with the auctioneer, to which she calmly pointed out that as her owner, all her earnings naturally belonged to him anyway. She offered a bright, playful smile, confessing that she would have run off with the gold had she not taken a liking to him, noting his strength and striking appearance. Catching her eye as they strolled onward, he accepted her compliment with quiet surprise while she teasingly insisted on her absolute sincerity. He stopped in his tracks along the stone path as the young woman paused, hesitation creeping into her voice before she admitted that she had a bold request to make. Intrigued by her sudden change in tone, he turned to face her, questioning what kind of favor she could possibly ask, while she nervously clenched the hem of her frayed clothing. Looking up with desperate determination in her eyes, she implored him to execute her childhood friend, a request so unexpected that it left him utterly stunned. Demanding to understand the path that led to such vengeance, he listened as she recounted how a trusted friend betrayed her and sold her into slavery, finally revealing her true identity as Eleanor Carlfin Lund Cornelia, the third princess of the Cornelia Kingdom. The royal conflict began in the Cornelia Kingdom, where fierce disputes erupted over who was rightful heir to the crown. Because she was the third princess, kingdom tradition dictated that whichever man married her eldest sister would ascend the throne. However, her father defied all expectations by declaring that whoever wed her would inherit the crown instead, prompting her to renounce all royal claims and flee the kingdom. After escaping her royal life, she found freedom as an adventurer alongside 3 trusted companions, sharing in countless perilous yet fulfilling journeys. Yet that cherished peace was abruptly shattered during her own birthday party. Led through the dark with a blindfold over her eyes, she was guided forward by her companions, who promised her a grand birthday surprise. Once seated on a wooden chair, she happily agreed to wait in the dark while they stepped away to make the final preparations. As she waited in excited anticipation, cold metal was suddenly locked around her neck, accompanied by a chilling birthday greeting. Her delight instantly dissolved into horror upon realizing she had been fitted with a slave collar, leaving her calling out in desperation as her trusted friends betrayed her. Her mind reeled as the terrible truth shattered her remaining hope. Her own sisters had bribed her trusted companions to sell her into slavery. She had screamed for help, calling out to her party members in desperation, but they merely stood by and watched as she was dragged away in chains. Returning to the present, the dark-haired warrior expressed his deep disgust at the wretched plot, astonished by the sheer cruelty of her royal sisters and the cowardice of her allies. Unable to forgive the traitors who ruined her life, the exiled princess implored him to lend his strength to her cause and aid her in seeking vengeance. Clutching her chest in anguish, she recounted the endless dread of her captivity, admitting that surviving each day without being completely broken felt like a miracle. Tears welled in her eyes as her voice broke, confessing just how terrifying every single day had been until he finally bought her at the auction block. Moved by her profound sorrow, the swordsman pulled her into a firm, comforting embrace, agreeing to take up her cause and fight by her side. As she looked up in quiet shock, he formally introduced himself as Egil, sealing his pledge as her protector. Walking together down the quiet city passage, a silent vow took root in his heart to ensure she would never wear such a sorrowful face ever again. Later that evening, dressed in an elegant new gown, she twirled happily beneath the moonlight and playfully asked for his approval, receiving his quiet confirmation of her beauty. She bowed deeply, offering her heartfelt gratitude for the fine garments he had gifted her. Sitting on the couch, he assured her that seeing her dressed so comfortably brought him great satisfaction. Moving to ease her burden further, he produced a slate-like control device capable of undoing slave bindings and offered to remove her collar immediately. Startled by the gesture, she questioned whether he feared she might take the opportunity to flee. He simply smiled, explaining his core belief that he would rather live choosing to trust people than spend his life consumed by suspicion, even if that trust might one day lead to betrayal. Touched by his unconditional warmth, she looked at him with soft eyes, marveling at how unusual a man he was and insisting that removing the collar was no longer necessary. Leaning in closely, her gaze fixed entirely upon his, she passionately pledged her absolute trust and allegiance, promising to fulfill any desire he might ask of her. Recognizing her fatigue after everything she had endured, he gently suggested she take a relaxing bath while deferring the rest of her story until tomorrow, though she modestly insisted that a master should always bathe before their servant. Stepping into the warm, vapor-filled bathhouse alone, he struggled to keep his composure, his mind racing from the unaccustomed tension of being in such close quarters with a woman. Suddenly, she entered the bath disrobed to join him, offering to wash his back as a duty of gratitude, leaving him utterly stunned and flustered as he stammered that he could handle himself. Pressing herself gently against his back in the water, she timidly questioned if he found her unappealing, prompting him to hastily reassure her of her immense beauty. With tears of profound affection welling in her flushed face, she confessed that she had no other home left in the world, declaring her innermost wish to remain at his side forever. She stood close beside him in the steam, reassuring him that loving her would bring her nothing but pure delight. Whispering her true name, he felt the heavy weight of her earnest devotion settled between them. Taking a seat, he cautioned her not to regret her words later, asking her to simply focus on washing his body for now. She accepted without hesitation, gently pouring warm water over his shoulders. As she lathered his back, she openly admired his muscular frame and battle scars, while humbly asking if he could accept a body like hers, marked by former battles and hardship. Flustered by her bold praise of his chest and arms, he privately wondered how she could speak so fluently of pleasing a man if she were truly inexperienced. Continuing to scrub his chest with vigor, she insisted that such words of devotion were meant for his ears alone, even as he winced at her overly enthusiastic rubbing. Turning to face her, he felt the warmth of her breath against his skin, her shimmering eyes fixed intently upon him in silent anticipation of a kiss. Looking up at him with flushed cheeks and trembling lips, she breathlessly urged him to take the initiative and be far more aggressive with her. Overcome by her bold invitation, he pulled her onto his lap and locked his lips onto hers, sealing her passionate request for intimacy with a deep embrace. Inside the quiet chamber, he carried the young princess gently in his arms, his chest heavy with expectation for the evening ahead. He found himself marveling at the strange turn of events, reflecting on how an elite S-rank warrior could feel such genuine nervous excitement over the royal slave he had recently acquired. Flashbacks of his past triumphs rushed through his memory, slaying legendary beasts, conquering impossible quests, and facing mythical horrors. Yet none of those peril-filled moments made his heart race quite like this. Settling beside her near the bed, he listened as she let out a soft laugh, admitting she had not expected him to carry her all the way into the bedroom. She clasped her hands over her heart with a radiant flush, sharing her fluttering excitement, to which he smiled warmly and agreed that they should continue without delay. Afterward, while resting side by side, she teasingly questioned whether he had grown accustomed to observing female adventurers, sending him into a flustered state of rapid denials. Attempting to divert the subject, she reached over into her discarded belongings near her towel, searching carefully for her official registration card. Presenting the item proudly, she displayed her guild card to him, revealing her C-rank status and her specialized class as a Saint Force user. She elaborated on her Saint Force class, explaining how it allowed her to summon powerful holy beasts to fight on her behalf, though the immense mana strain made it quite rare. When she playfully admitted she chose it simply because the holy beasts were adorable, her companion teased her for selecting such an unusual path. Curious about his background in return, she asked if she could inspect his adventurer card. The young man readily agreed, expressing his gratitude for her insightful explanation regarding her abilities. Reaching over to the bedside table where the card lay, she retrieved the document. However, as her eyes scanned the official credentials, a wave of sheer astonishment washed over her face. Displayed upon the parchment was his true standing, an elite S-rank designation, an extraordinary rank held by only a select few. Staring in disbelief at the card, she questioned how he could be a high-ranking solo adventurer. He offered a modest response, admitting with a quiet grin that others had often told him he possessed exceptional talent. Gently resting her hand on his chest, she raised a concern about the grave risks involved in aiding her vengeance, warning that getting involved might brand them as criminals and tarnish his reputation. He reassured her that as an adventurer, he had no qualms about leaving the kingdom if trouble arose. Pulling her close into an affectionate embrace from behind, he confessed that he had fallen in love with her from the very first moment they met, making it impossible for him to ever turn her down. Moved to tears by his heartfelt declaration, she whispered his name, her cheeks flushed with overwhelming gratitude and affection. Egil addresses Jessendorf calmly, prompting the informant to turn around in utter surprise at his sudden request. Joining Jessendorf and Muselina at the table, he takes his place while the masked man asks what business brings him here. Looking across at his contact, he explicitly states his goal. He requires help locating 3 specific C-rank adventurers. He elaborates further, identifying the targets as 2 men and 1 woman, explicitly naming Kuro, Madrid, and Muselina. Hearing the names, the masked informant gnaws on his finger thoughtfully, musing over the difficulty of finding C-rank targets while Egil inquires if there is a problem. He explains that his network primarily tracks high-ranking adventurers, making lower-tier targets difficult to locate without knowing their usual haunts. In response, the dark-haired warrior holds up a single finger, offering a 1-week timeline for investigation, to which his contact readily agrees before Egil introduces a second request. Fixing his gaze on the informant, he asks to be introduced to a slaver who specializes specifically in dealing human men and women. Upon hearing the unexpected demand, the informant's eyes widen behind his mask in sharp intrigue. He leaned forward across the table, questioning whether the strange request was tied directly to the slave bought the previous day. Egil acknowledged that while she had asked him to act, he was also pursuing the matter out of his own desire. Because of this conversation, Egil was instantly reminded of the harrowing night where the young woman writhed in agony during a nightmare, desperately crying out for someone to help her as she relived her trauma. Staring down at the heavy metallic collar around her neck, he vowed to himself that he would break the chains of her haunting past and set her free once and for all. Returning to the present exchange, his companion voiced a stern warning, cautioning against placing too much trust in mere slaves and insidiously asking if he really wanted to suffer another bitter betrayal. Enraged by the mention of his painful past, Egil glared fiercely at his informant, barking out a demand to know who had dared to spread such personal information to him. Unfazed by the outburst, the masked man casually dismissed it as a passing rumor, though he noted that Egil's explosive reaction only confirmed its truth. Cutting him off, Egil sternly instructed him to drop the subject and simply carry out the requested tasks. As Egil exited the establishment and stepped outside into the street, he ordered the informant to report any leads immediately. Alone with his thoughts, he grew concerned for Eleanor's well-being, knowing how poorly slaves were perceived by ordinary citizens. Meanwhile, across town inside a quiet bookstore, Eleanor was eagerly scanning the tall wooden shelves until her eyes locked onto a specific title, letting out a gasp of excitement. She pulled the books from the shelves, holding them close to her chest with a look of pure delight as she realized she had finally found what she was searching for. Thrilled by her unexpected discovery, she resolved to buy both the 3rd and 4th volumes on the spot. The cover revealed her prize to be an explicit romance novel titled The Noble Lady Experiences Ecstasy in the Muscly Knight's Embrace. Rapidly placing her coins onto the counter to hasten her exit, her thoughts drifted to her master, whose imposing presence far surpassed any mere merchant. Retreating into the privacy of a secluded alleyway, she leaned against a wooden wall to catch her breath, unsettled by the encounter, yet relieved to have obtained her secret purchases in complete secrecy. Blushing heavily and gasping for breath, she accepted her complete submission to him, realizing she would obey whatever outrageous demand he made of her. A sudden physical reaction forced her back to reality, leaving her mortified at becoming so visibly aroused right in the middle of a public alleyway. Before she could fully gather her composure, harsh shouting echoed down the passage as 2 men engaged in a heated argument over the ownership of a slave. Peering around the stone corner, she observed a slave trader barking demands at a noble, claiming the captive standing between them belonged to him. Recognizing the slave merchant from her own past auction, her focus shifted instantly to the young woman held in heavy chains. Shocked to discover that the chained captive was Selena, her heart swelled with urgency, knowing her friend needed saving in both mind and body. Selena breaks away in desperate haste, fleeing toward her former companion while calling out for aid. Stepping forward to shield her, Eleanor confronts the slave handlers, requesting a brief moment to speak with the captive girl. When the men scoff at the request, Eleanor reminds them that she is under the protection of Egil, a renowned S-ranked adventurer. The head trader sneers in disbelief, questioning the authority of this newcomer. She stands firm against his skepticism, coldly warning the trader that if Egil were informed of their mistreatment, his life would be swiftly forfeited. The handler hesitates, shaken by the grave implication of facing an S-ranked warrior's wrath. Before the confrontation can escalate further, a masked figure lurking in the shadows threatens to step in personally if the trader remains unpersuaded. Clicking his tongue in annoyance, the trader relents and orders his men to wrap up their business quickly. As they turn away, Selena collapses to the cobblestones from sheer exhaustion and trauma. Seeing her fall, Eleanor rushes to her side and pulls the trembling girl into a tight, comforting embrace, checking if she is unharmed. Clinging desperately to her rescuer, Selena breaks down in tears, admitting how terrified she had been throughout the ordeal. Eleanor softly reassures her, promising to keep her safe from any further harm. As she holds her friend, Eleanor gazes at her with deep concern, struck by how vulnerable Selena has become compared to the strong-willed companion she once knew. Her thoughts drift back to a time when their roles were reversed, remembering how Selena had gently teased her for being a crybaby while trying to hide her own fear of their uncertain future. Despite her own anxiety, Selena had smiled brightly, offering soothing words to comfort Eleanor in their dark hour, making her current distress all the more heartbreaking. She remembered how Selena's bright, courage-inspiring smile had once given her strength, filling her with the unshakable resolve to protect her dear friend no matter the cost. Continuing her painful story, Selena recounted how she had been sold to Earl Jessendorf, a man whose gentle, calm exterior masked a truly monstrous cruelty, willing to inflict severe violence with a polite smile. Overcome by despair, she described how he had beaten her repeatedly, again and again, until she could no longer endure the abuse and made a desperate attempt to escape his grasp. Though the Earl had easily tracked her down, she confirmed that he had not violated her maidenhood, prompting a relieved Eleanor to pull her into a tight, comforting embrace. Turning her attention to the slave merchant, the noblewoman demanded details regarding the upcoming auction and fiercely warned him not to lay a single finger on her friend until the bidding took place. Intimidated by her stern command, the merchant hastily agreed to preserve the girl's well-being, prompting her to firmly declare her absolute resolve to return and buy back her friend. Seeing her determination, Egil questioned whether she was trying to oppose his own plans, yet she remained steadfast, realizing that legally winning the auction was the only true way to secure Selena's freedom. Ignoring the arrogant taunts of Earl Jessendorf, who sneered at her past, she grit her teeth in frustration and softly promised Selena that she would return to save her very soon. Later, in order to secure Egil's immense wealth and influence against the Earl's upcoming bid, she placed herself entirely at his mercy, offering her total submission in exchange for his backing. Kneeling on the floor before him, she pleaded earnestly for him to grant her selfish favor, emphasizing that she sought only his aid to win the auction and save her friend. As she listened in awe, he openly confessed his love for her, asking if she shared those very same feelings. Tears welled in her eyes as a sudden realization washed over her, reflecting on how foolish she had been to doubt his heart. Wiping away her tears, she struggled through her trembling voice to acknowledge that he was no longer merely her master, but her beloved partner. With a soft, radiant smile breaking through her tears, she poured out her heart, declaring that she loved him completely and unequivocally. Overwhelmed with relief, she threw herself into his arms to beg for his help, while he embraced her tightly and gently chastised her for taking such desperate risks again. Burying her face against his chest, she wept tears of profound gratitude, begging him from the depths of her soul to save her cherished friend. Later, over a quiet meal together, they discussed the upcoming auction, where she revealed that Selena's former master was already lining up as a competing bidder. Her gaze dropped with anxiety, dreading that securing her friend's freedom might prove to be an uphill battle. Noticing her distress, he gently told her not to worry, while silently calculating that despite spending heavily to purchase her before, he still maintained $400 million in his reserve. Setting his spoon aside after finishing his meal, he gave thanks for the food, his mind fully committed to winning the coming conflict. Standing up from the table with a firm scraping of his chair, He proposed taking on quests as soon as Eleanor finished her meal, catching her completely off guard. He went on to explain that by completing high-reward quests, they could amass a fortune to buy back her friend Selena. The sudden ray of hope filled Eleanor's eyes with light as she enthusiastically agreed to join him. Setting out on horseback, the young swordsman reviewed the daunting list of tasks ahead, slaying 5 drakes, hunting a ghoul, capturing a morpho, and defeating a red dragon, all within 7 days. Beside him, the princess remained steadfast, her heart set on rescuing her captive companion. Before their departure, a friendly ally had handed over extra supplies to the princess, wishing the pair good fortune on what he promised would be a wonderful quest. He praised the young warrior's good nature, quietly mentioning that he provided rations specifically to help sustain the princess's stamina during the journey. She smiled radiantly in heartfelt appreciation. As the steed trotted along the road, the rhythmic sway of the journey caused her chest to bounce continuously against his back. Glancing over his shoulder, the swordsman voiced concern about her bold attire for such a dangerous quest, but she softly reassured him that the dress was precious to her simply because it was a gift from him. Afterward, she gently wiped her lips with a blushing smile, remarking on the experience and anticipating what the night might bring, leaving the young man completely flustered. He paused along the forest trail alongside Eleanor as ragged panting echoed from the dense trees ahead. Dismissing the sound with cool indifference, he reasoned it was simply other adventurers engaged in battle. Meanwhile, in the clearing ahead, 2 young female adventurers were locked in a desperate struggle. The young light mage urged her companion, Sana, to help lure their towering adversary into the open so she could prepare a powerful spell. Sprinting through the underbrush, the 2 girls succeeded in drawing the hulking, stone-skinned behemoth into a clearer space, its massive footfalls shaking the ground behind them. As they took position, the mage began channeling high-tier light magic, determined not to let any target steal her prey. Yet amidst her intense focus, she caught sight of riders approaching through the trees in the distance. Unleashing her fully charged magic, she cried out as a majestic angelic figure materialized above her, raining down a devastating beam of radiant energy directly onto the creature. To their horror, the massive beast emerged completely unscathed from the radiant pillar. Desperate to turn the tide, Sana drew back her bow and launched a barrage skyward, praying her magical arrow assault would hit its mark. Although her arrows burst overhead like brilliant fireworks, the volley bounced uselessly off the creature's impenetrable hide. Observing from the tree line, he remarked to Eleanor that light and simple physical attacks were useless against a glaciant, just as the enraged monster raised its fist. Enraged, the behemoth slammed its massive, boulder-like fist downward, prompting the 2 trapped girls to scream out in horror for each other to run. The cataclysmic impact shook the earth, sending a shower of shattered rock and debris flying directly toward the defenseless companions. Before the crushing blow could claim them, he surged forward on his steed in a flash of speed, scooping both girls up into his arms to carry them out of harm's way. He pulled the 2 startled girls close, asking if they were all right, while half-jokingly questioning if they were attempting to steal his hunt. Recovering her composure, the young light mage hastily chanted an incantation, summoning a pack of radiant spectral wolves known as Light Fenrir to lure the creature away. At her command, the luminous beasts charged across the terrain, drawing the behemoth's attention toward the trap. As the creature thrashed after the glowing decoys, Eleanor watched the monster's relentless advance through the forest with mounting concern. Suddenly, the severe strain of long-depleted mana took its toll, causing her knees to buckle beneath her as she collapsed onto the dirt, completely exhausted. Realizing she could no longer move out of harm's way, the swordsman spurred his steed forward and raised his gloved hand, invoking his lethal power, the Endless Sword. In an instant, a barrage of spectral blades materialized out of thin air, impaling the giant glaciant from every angle as it roared in agonizing pain. With the monster utterly vanquished, he dismounted and calmly checked on Eleanor, leaving her completely awestruck by the staggering display of power belonging to Sword Genesis, the legendary S-rank adventurer. As they rest beneath the forest canopy, one of the newly rescued young women expresses her heartfelt gratitude, reassuring her savior that she is feeling much better after the traumatic ordeal. His royal companion marvels at the astounding nature of his power, reflecting on the secret behind his infinite sword dance technique. A formidable skill capable of storing countless blades in a pocket dimension and summoning them at will. He clarifies that his true power, sword genesis, goes far beyond mere dimensional storage. It is an absolute mastery reserved exclusively for true grandmasters, allowing sharp weapons to materialize out of thin air wherever he desires. Turning his gaze toward the twin adventurers, he sternly questions them about their official rank, blunt in his assessment that their present capabilities fall dangerously short of what is required to hunt a threat like Glaciant. Observing the heavy awkwardness in the air, his companion steps forward to soften his severe demeanor, reassuring the timid sisters that despite his sharp tongue and intimidating presence, he possesses a deeply caring heart. Clenching their hands tightly, the sisters confess their painful reality. They belong to the lowest tier of adventurers and foolishly threw themselves into danger in a desperate bid to prove their worth to the world. Driven by a burning urge to overcome their limitations, they meet his gaze with unyielding determination, resolving aloud that they must become stronger no matter what obstacles lie ahead. Softening his posture, he reaches out to gently place his hands atop their heads, commending their fierce spirit while offering a sober warning that unchecked resolve without sufficient strength will only lead them to an early grave. He offered to show the young adventurers how to fight, but noticed the deep skepticism written plainly across their faces. Stepping back into the shadow of the trees, the sisters huddled together to whisper about their options, wary that he was merely trying to swindle them, though they reluctantly admitted they lacked the funds to hire a proper instructor anyway. Suddenly, a horrifying realization struck the pair. Without money to pay for his guidance, they feared he might sell them into servitude instead, causing them to gasp in sheer terror. Seeing their panic rise, Muselina stepped forward with a serene smile, assuring the frightened girls that her companion would never resort to such cruelty. When the twins skeptically pressed her on how she could be so certain, she gently explained that he never sought monetary payment from anyone. To reveal the truth of her words, she pulled back the edge of her neckline, exposing the heavy metal collar locked firmly around her neck. The sisters gasped in shock upon realizing she was a slave, but Muselina calmly explained that despite her bound status, he treated her as an absolute equal and demanded nothing in return for fulfilling her wishes. Standing before them with unwavering devotion, she asked the bewildered twins if they could still harbor any doubts about her master's character. Her powerful words left the young adventurers completely speechless, freezing in stunned reflection as the truth sank in. Driven by overwhelming gratitude and newfound trust, both sisters abruptly dropped into a deep, desperate bow before him, pleading for his instruction. He looked at Eleanor with a puzzled expression, wondering how she had so easily persuaded the young adventurers to drop their defense, but she simply offered a serene chuckle, explaining that such inspiration was merely a natural result of his noble character. As night fell over the rugged wilderness, the group established a quiet camp under the open sky, letting their resting mounts settle down beside the flickering fire. Over the glowing embers, thick skewers of savory meat sizzled enticingly, filling the cool night air with a rich, appetizing aroma. Drawn by the irresistible feast, the twin sisters devoured the meat with unrestrained delight, while he silently observed how remarkably identical their features were as they ate side by side. As they savored the meal, the young women clarified their respective roles, identifying Sana as a skilled mana archer and Luna as a dedicated priest. Seeing that they had refused their share of the quest reward in exchange for a warm meal, he proposed a fair deal, offering to mentor them in combat during their quest. Hearing his offer, the twins eagerly affirmed that coin mattered little to them, explaining that their sole desire was to grow strong enough to overcome their limitations. Satisfied with the agreement, the companions relaxed together around the hearth, sharing laughter and endless skewers until every last bocado was gone. Later that night inside the main tent, the exhausted sisters quickly drifted off into a deep, peaceful sleep, nestled together on the bedrolls while Eleanor smiled fondly at their calm expressions. Watching the sleeping twins, Egil pondered the severe strain they had placed upon themselves, contemplating what intense motive could drive two young girls to starve and exhaust themselves so completely in pursuit of strength. He considers their motivation, staring down at a map marked with a specific objective that can only be achieved through immense strength. As he sips his warm drink, Eleanor reflects on how much the twin sisters have endured on their own, feeling that despite her own royal background, those two young girls possess a maturity born of hardship. Looking directly at her with a reassuring smile, he offers his full support, ready to stand by her side in her cause. However, he sets a clear boundary, explaining that unless she is fully open with him about her thoughts and feelings, he cannot act on her behalf. Moved by his candor, she wraps her arms around his neck, confessing that while she often doubts her past choices, walking beside him is the one path she truly desires. Gazing into his eyes, she softly speaks his name, the quiet space between them charged with unspoken emotion. Surrendering to the moment, their lips meet in a tender and passionate kiss. Pulling back with a heavy blush on her cheeks, she is caught off guard when he points out that the two young twins are sleeping just feet away in the same tent, forcing them to restrain themselves. Soothing her initial embarrassment, she smiles softly and promises to respect his boundary, while declaring her ultimate devotion should he ever ask for more. Setting his cup back down on the table, he firmly reassures her that he would never take advantage of her devotion, before gently suggesting it is time to sleep. He lay sprawled inside the dark tent, heavy gasps escaping his lips as a sudden, intense heat flushed through his entire body. Beside him, Eleanor leaned in with deep concern, asking if he was all right as beads of sweat rolled profusely down his skin. Offering to gently wipe away the perspiration, she leaned closer, unaware of how wildly his pulse was racing. From below, his dark eyes locked onto her with a sudden, predatory intensity. Driven past his limit by the rising fever, he moved instantly, pulling her down into his embrace despite her surprise at his sudden turn of restraint. Gazing up at his fierce gaze, she quietly acknowledged to herself that the secret concoction she had slipped into his drink had finally taken full effect, driving him into an unyielding haze of raw desire. In the adjoining tent, their traveling companions lay wide awake, blushing deeply as every intimate sound carried across the stillness, leaving them utterly captivated and unable to turn away. Standing at the threshold, they gazed into the ominous mouth of the Red Dragon's lair, the final and most dangerous threshold of their quest. Stepping inside the subterranean gloom, he cautioned the group that this mission lacked the safety of their previous endeavors and that any carelessness would prove fatal. In response to his grave warning, ESRI stepped forward to bolster morale, reminding her companions of the valuable combat experience they had gained together. Her encouraging words brought a sense of shared warmth and determination to the young women as they reaffirmed their bond. However, the reassuring moment was shattered when a sharp crunch echoed from the shadows, causing him to immediately command everyone to hush. Peering into the cavern's depths, he observed 3 giant red dragons resting together, entirely unaware of their presence. Seizing the element of surprise, he urged them to initiate a preemptive strike, prompting Selena to chant a powerful incantation that summoned a massive aqua dragon to clash against the beasts. She unleashed a devastating torrent of water, blasting one of the unsuspecting beasts head-on before its companions could comprehend the attack. Taking advantage of the sudden opening, her companions surged forward into the cavern, closing the distance to strike while the remaining creatures reeled in confusion. Working in synchronized harmony, Sana summoned her sacred light spell while ESRI directed her magical energy to strike down their targets in a single blow. The combined magical assault erupted against the monsters with overwhelming force, completely subduing them in a blinding flash. As the smoke cleared, the group stood side by side over the vanquished drakes, their ambushing strategy having yielded an effortless victory. Exchanging relieved smiles, ESRI boasted about how simple the fight had been, though Selena praised their execution and Sana credited Eleanor's strategic guidance. Shifting immediately back to business, Eleanor directed them to harvest a dragon tongue as proof of completing their quest, surprising Sana with the grim directive. While Sana expressed her disgust over processing dragon parts for luxury trade, ESRI questioned whether she possessed the stomach required to confront a full-fledged red dragon. Guiding them down the dimly lit passage, Eleanor warned that their quick triumph was purely the result of a surprise attack, reminding them that a single hit from a real dragon would be fatal. Emerging into a colossal subterranean chamber, the companions came face to face with a massive red dragon slumbering among ancient stone ruins. He quietly briefed his companions on the dragon's combat patterns, pointing out that despite the creature's intimidating presence, its fire attacks followed a predictable motion. Continuing his explanation, he noted that dragons always pull their heads back before breathing fire, granting a crucial window to dodge, though the thought of direct fire still unnerved his companions. A sudden low creak interrupted their conversation, prompting him to instantly adapt his plan and instruct the group to aim for the creature's limbs while he drew its attention. Before they could take another step, the giant red dragon's slit-pupiled eye snapped open, locking onto them. With no time to lose, the swordsman lunged directly toward the awakening beast, delivering a striking blow to draw its aggression away from the others. As he engaged the massive threat, his allies rallied behind him, casting supporting light magic and reassessing their tactical approach against the monster's thick hide. In response to the assault, the enraged dragon unleashed a torrent of fire across the cavern floor, forcing everyone to scramble for safety. A wall of blinding flames swept across the ground, engulfing the subterranean chamber in intense heat. Emerging from the blazing cloud, the giant red dragon threw back its head and unleashed a deafening roar. Standing firmly between the roaring beast and his companions, he raised his blade to prepare his ultimate technique, Endless Sword. He immediately noticed the massive dragon freeze in its tracks, calling out to his companions to seize the opening. Responding without hesitation, Esri channeled her mana and summoned a roaring surge of water magic to strike their stationary foe. The aquatic construct crashed directly into the beast, unleashing a relentless succession of heavy impacts that slammed against its scaled hide. Despite taking the full force of the elemental onslaught, the dragon refused to fall, expanding its lungs as fresh embers flared within its jaws while the spellcasters looked on in dread. Even as they managed to evade the infernal blast by anticipating its movements, Esri pointed out the grim reality. Dodging was only a temporary respite, and running out of magical energy would spell their utter doom. Overwhelmed by helplessness and with tears welling in her eyes, Sana voiced her desperate wish to stand alongside them and contribute to the fight. Hearing her heartfelt plea, Eleanor turned toward the distraught girl, his gaze softening as he gently spoke her name. With unwavering confidence in his eyes, he urged Sana to chant her most formidable holy spell, assuring her that she possessed the strength to vanquish the red dragon and put an end to her doubts. Facing down the colossal dragon, the white-haired mage admitted that while she would be honored to strike the final blow, her remaining magical reserves were far too depleted to cast her ultimate spell. Stepping up behind her without hesitation, the dark-haired swordsman offered to share his own reserves, initiating a direct transfer of magic that caught her completely off guard. Gasping as the surge coursed through her body, she felt his intense power rushing into her, overwhelming her senses with its searing warmth. Meanwhile, the monstrous dragon began inhaling deeply, gathering fiery breath in its throat for another devastating attack with nowhere left for them to hide. Guiding her hands as her magic reached its absolute peak, he recited the sacred incantation alongside her, calling upon divine forces to smite their foe. Unleashing the full force of holy judgment, a blinding light illuminated the cavern, summoning divine angelic figures that rained catastrophic power directly down upon the dragon. Under the crushing blast of heavenly judgment, the massive beast slammed headfirst into the stone floor, thoroughly defeated. Watching the terrifying dragon fall, their companions stood frozen in utter disbelief at the sheer magnitude of the spell that had just been cast. She watched as the young man gently held the exhausted maiden in his arms. After being asked if she was all right, the priestess confessed that it was her first time casting magic on such a massive scale. Though he humbly reminded her that it was her own skill that brought down the beast, she closed her eyes with a contented smile, knowing she had truly contributed to the victory before slipping into unconsciousness. Approaching the pair with concern, the two companions asked if the young woman was unhurt. He reassured them that she had simply passed out from the massive drain on her mana, admitting that even he felt somewhat drained after channeling so much power. Turning his attention to the fallen beast, he asked if they could harvest the valuable scales from the red dragon's carcass. Though surprised by the request, both women quickly agreed to take care of the task. Bidding him to rest and recover his strength, they promised to handle the harvesting duties entirely on their own. As he carried her back toward their camp, he couldn't help but reflect on how quiet and gentle she seemed now, so different from her usual fiery and competitive temperament. Looking down at her serene expression, he silently acknowledged to himself that her sleeping face was remarkably sweet. Shortly after, the party established a secure campsite among the canyon rocks, setting up tents to rest for the night following the intense battle. By the following morning, the camp awoke, and the two women greeted him before heading off to bathe in a nearby spring. He offered to stay behind and keep watch over their recovering companion inside the tent. Once they were left alone, the young woman finally opened her eyes and sat up. Seeing her awake, he suggested she should have joined the others for a bath, but she confessed that she had stayed behind deliberately to speak with him in private. Looking directly into his eyes with intense earnestness, she asked if they could continue working together to grow even stronger in the days ahead. She firmly declined alongside her companion when he asked if either planned to switch classes, prompting him to reassure them that continuous effort would still lead to growth. Reinforcing the point with absolute conviction, the woman declared that neither of them had any such plans, nor would they for the foreseeable future. With that matter settled, she casually shifted the topic to pry into his dynamic with the young women, leaning in close and sparking sudden curiosity among them. Flustered by the unexpected inquiry, he turned beet red and stammered out that their bond was somewhat akin to that of lovers. Continuing her bold interrogation, she claimed to see right through his reserved front and offered to teach them how a true intimate relationship functions as thanks for their guidance in combat. Returning to the present conversation, she cheekily advised him to test her recommendations the next time he found himself in such an intimate moment. Surprised by her unexpected familiarity with such topics, he questioned where she had acquired such knowledge, only for her to reveal that she had read about it in her favorite books. Excusing herself from the tent, she announced that she was heading off to bathe, suggesting he accept the view as a small installment toward repaying her debt to him. As she paused at the edge of the tent curtain, she called out to him, prompting the dark-haired warrior to glance back with a quiet grunt of inquiry. Her tone grew earnest as she asked whether he would come to their aid in the future, should they ever face a crisis so severe that all their efforts proved useless. Without a moment's hesitation, he offered her an unwavering promise, assuring her that he would absolutely be there to assist. Hearing his solid commitment brought a gentle, relieved smile to her face as she expressed her sincere wish that they would never encounter a situation desperate enough to require it. Saying her final farewells, she offered a cheerful wave as she stepped outside, while he lazily raised a hand in return to bid her take care. Outside, the tranquil campsite rested quietly under the open sky, yet the weight of that solemn promise lingered long after her departure. After their companions took their leave, the swordsman pushed onward through the dungeon, cleaving through the remaining beasts to finish the remaining quest obligations. Returning home, he carefully counted the accumulated rewards, stacking tall piles of coin until they reached a total of 500,000 gold pieces to serve as their maximum bid. Upon entering the auction venue, his companion quietly pointed toward the noble seats where Selena's former master sat, his glare radiating sharp hostility across the room. As they surveyed the audience, Jessendorf and Havalik stepped up from behind, revealing that curiosity had drawn them to witness the high-stakes event as well. Leaning in close amidst the crowd, Jessendorf delivered his reconnaissance report on the movements of their targets, receiving a quiet acknowledgement and orders to talk later. When asked if he had come to purchase another slave, he plainly confirmed his intention, casually adding that if his money failed to win her, he would take her by force. His allies immediately panicked, warning him that resort to violence would guarantee expulsion and a permanent ban from every auction city, just as the auctioneer announced the opening of bidding. On the brightly lit stage, bound captives were brought forward before the eager crowd, as bidders across the hall raised their hands to begin the fierce competition. Watching the slave auction unfold was painful, but Egil refused Ezri's offer to step outside, determined to see things through to the end. He watched intently as the stage was prepared for the next lot, and Sanaa gasped upon recognizing Selena being brought out in chains. She stood bound on stage as the crowd erupted into bids, with Count Jestegard quickly driving the price up to 1.5 million gold coins. He continued his aggressive bidding without hesitation, pushing the sum past 4 million as the rest of the buyers fell silent. In response, Egil pushed his fortune to the absolute brink, raising the bid to 5 million while desperately hoping it would be enough to win her. However, his noble adversary smugly countered without a moment's pause, raising the price to an astronomical 6 million gold coins. With his money exhausted, he quietly reached for the hilt of his blade to take her by force, a desperate gesture that filled Sanaa with sorrow as she noticed. Just as he was about to draw his weapon, an unexpected voice called out a higher offer of 6.5 million coins, stopping him in his tracks. He turned around in utter disbelief to find Jessendorf standing tall beside him, loudly declaring the massive bid before the shocked crowd. The masked warrior reassured Egil with a smirk, pledging his own wealth to go as high as 10 million, which prompted Jestegard to angrily raise his offer to 7 million. His extravagant bid was instantly eclipsed when the masked stranger stepped up, casually raising the offer to 7.5 million gold and framing the vast fortune as a mere down payment on future favors. Building on that momentum, their blonde ally chimed in with another 2 million gold of his own, pointing out that allowing their leader to be driven from the city was simply out of the question. A subtle smile crossed the young warrior's face as he quietly voiced his thanks, marveling inwardly at the sheer fortune and loyalty of the companions standing beside him. Eager to crush any lingering hope of competition, their exuberant companion urged the group to push the bid all the way to 20 million, stunning everyone with his sheer boldness. With a triumphant bellow, he officially shouted out a staggering price of 12 million gold, draining the color completely from the arrogant count's face. The auctioneer called for further bids, but the humiliated noble could only grit his teeth in bitter, silent defeat, completely outmatched in wealth. As the hammer struck to seal the sale at 12 million, the victorious group burst into excitement, celebrating their successful rescue of the young woman. Stepping out into the alleyways after the auction, the emotional slave girl hurled herself into her savior's arms, crying out her name with immense relief. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she sobbed out her overwhelming gratitude, though her humble protector gently tried to minimize her own contribution. Her companion warmly reassured her that the true credit belonged to their wealthy benefactors and the unwavering leadership of their master, leaving the two men beaming with pride. She stood stunned when her newly freed companion abruptly gripped her sleeve, asking if they could run away together. Tears welled in the traumatized woman's eyes as she confessed her deep-seated fear of men, admitting that despite her overwhelming gratitude, she still viewed them only as predators. Listening sympathetically, she explained that while her time with Egil had been pleasant, her own dark memories and lingering anger remained unresolved beneath her calm facade. Their quiet exchange was interrupted when Havalik approached to ask if they were ready to leave, prompting her friend to quickly apologize for speaking out of line. Offering a gentle smile, she invited her troubled friend to live alongside them, an invitation that was accepted with relief. Moments later, as they walked through the narrow stone streets, she turned back only to discover that her new companion had mysteriously vanished from the alley. Farther down the corridor, the fleeing woman sprinted away in silence, overwhelmed by her terror of men and silently begging for forgiveness. As she desperately navigated the secluded alleyways, a dark, menacing figure silently stepped out to block her path. Before she could scream, a ruthless henchman clamped a heavy hand over her mouth and pressed a sharp dagger against her neck, forcing her forward without a sound. Terrified and weeping, she was delivered directly back into the hands of Count Jestegard, who gleefully claimed his escaped prize once more. High above the bustling town, a merchant approached the dark-haired adventurer with an unexpected proposal, asking if he would act as his personal escort. The plump merchant explained that he needed protection to transport a vast sum of gold to another city, citing the young man's S-rank reputation. However, the swordsman eyed him with cold suspicion, questioning where such wealth originated and whether it was tied to the slave woman purchased recently. Instantly enraged by the mention of slave trading, He forcefully seized the merchant, barking an immediate rejection that sent a jolt of panic through the older man. Lifting the terrified man off his feet by the collar, the warrior looked into his eyes with lethal intensity. He condemned those who stripped slaves of their freedom and joy, remarking bitterly that whether by noble vengefulness or street thugs, brutal retribution was bound to claim him soon enough. Driving a heavy poke straight into the merchant's nose as a parting lesson, he left the corrupt traitor squealing in agony upon the ground. Turning away from his torment, the dark-haired swordsman regrouped with his companions waiting down the avenue, where they eagerly asked what had transpired with the merchant. Before he could fully explain, a sudden, alarming piece of news regarding Selena broke through their conversation, catching him completely off guard. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the city, the arrogant Count Gestigart stood before the trembling maid, gloating that despite failing to outbid her purchasers at the auction, she had ultimately fallen back into his grasp. He gripped her outfit tightly, leaning in with a sinister smile to whisper that she belonged solely to him, revealing his twisted desire to abuse her physically without breaking her fragile spirit. He openly gloated over his captive, relishing her terror while declaring her his finest toy and threatening to break her leg to prevent another escape. Tears streamed down her face as guilt overwhelmed her, realizing how foolish she had been after everything done to help her, and she cried out in desperation for rescue. Before her tears could dry, a calm voice cut through the air, offering polite apologies while demanding that the noble step away from her immediately. Interposing himself, the dark-haired swordsman placed a firm hand on the aristocrat's chest, physically blocking him from approaching the terrified girl any further. Turning his attention to her, he gently checked if she was unharmed and expressed regret for allowing her to suffer such fear, leaving her in stunned disbelief. Outraged by the interference, the noble recoiled and bellowed warnings, arrogantly boasting of his title as the heir of House Layforth and threatening swift retribution if anyone dared lay a finger on him while calling out for his guards. He sneered with cruel arrogance, asserting that his family status gave him absolute right over slave girls, viewing them as mere disposable playthings to be abused and broken at his whim. Before another insult could leave his mouth, a devastating strike shattered his arrogance, as a heavy fist slammed directly into his face with overwhelming force. As the disgraced noble crumpled to the ground, clutching his bleeding jaw, the dark-haired warrior glared down at him, fiercely declaring that slaves were human beings, not objects, and denouncing his pathetic nobility. Lying face down in the dust and bleeding profusely, the humiliated noble could only whimper weak commands to his henchmen, while his attacker stood over him, unyielding and resolute. He stood over the defeated noble, watching as Gestigart's attendant accepted the reality of his master's downfall, recognizing the young man's shadow manipulation magic and realizing their violent feud was finally over. As Gestigart groveled in disbelief on the cobblestones, terrified of his father disowning him, his own butler coldly turned his back, declaring that the family lord had already reassigned the inheritance to the second son and abandoning the ruined nobleman on the spot. With the immediate threat dissolved, Selena looked up through tear-filled eyes, choked with emotion as she struggled to find the words to express her gratitude. Turning to her, he offered a quiet apology, reflecting that he should have anticipated Count Gestigart's relentless obsession and taken precautions earlier. Offering a gentle, reassuring smile, he promised that regardless of what challenges lay ahead, he would never allow anyone to harm her again. Overwhelmed by his kindness, she wept tears of relief and offered her own tearful apology, while Sana and Isri gathered around to comfort her, assuring her that her safety was all that mattered before he led them all back toward their home. Ignoring all protests, she dragged the stunned girl into the adjoining room and shoved her directly into a large wooden wardrobe, insisting it was all for her own good. Closing the wooden door, she announced that she and Eleanor were about to engage in an intimate encounter right outside, declaring that any reaction from her within would confirm her true feelings. Confined in the dark closet with a burning blush on her face, she struggled to comprehend her companion's outrageous scheme, even as a tiny part of her heartbeat fluttered in anticipation. Eleanor enters the quiet room, startled to discover Sanaa waiting for him in the shadows. She sits expectantly upon the bed, formally accepting his proposal and surrendering herself completely to his desires as his loyal companion. Noticing Selena fast asleep nearby, he wonders aloud what would happen if their companion were to wake up during such an intimate moment. She simply smiles, confessing that she would not mind at all if Selena awoke, looking forward to a time when all three of them could share such closeness together. Surprised by her bluntness, he hesitates and raises concerns about Selena's true feelings on the matter, leaving her momentarily taken aback. He goes on to explain that before this moment, he and Selena had already shared a personal promise with one another. This brings back memories of their past captivity, when she had vowed to reserve herself entirely for the man she would marry, despite their grim reality as slaves. Her companion had happily agreed to that compact, expressing her wish that both of them might fall in love with the same person so they could remain together forever. Returning to the present, she harbors a faint annoyance at being held to that past vow, yet she yields to his gentle command, closing her eyes in patient anticipation. As morning dawns over the quiet estate, she stands outside, refreshed but lost in deep contemplation. Carrying a basket of freshly washed laundry, her path crosses with the dark-haired swordsman, who offers a polite morning greeting. Flustered by his unexpected presence, she stammers back a response as he walks past. Watching from a distance as he sits comfortably beside his pale-haired companion inside the house, a shadow of insecurity falls over her, leading her to wonder if she is merely intruding on their natural harmony. Noticing her distance, the pale-haired girl warmly invites her to join them on the couch, but she frantically waves her hands, insisting she is perfectly fine remaining where she is. Later that day, as the swordsman prepares to depart in his travel coat, he informs them that an escort mission requires his attention and asks them to watch over the house in his absence. With him gone, she openly voices her internal doubts about her lingering anxiety around men, prompting her companion to offer gentle reassurance despite understanding her deep-seated hesitation. Their quiet conversation is suddenly cut short by a firm knock at the door, catching both women off guard as they head to answer it. Opening the door reveals the masked associate standing solemnly outside, who bypasses any mention of the departed swordsman to announce that he has urgent business to discuss with the two of them directly. He stood before the young women, prompting Selena to ask in confusion why he wanted to speak with them specifically. After serving him a hot cup of tea, the girls sat opposite him on the couch, prompting him to ask what urgent matter they wished to discuss. Expressing their curiosity about the man they now shared a home with, Selena earnestly asked if he would share Egel's past, prompting the masked man to offer the true story of why Egel had become an S-rank adventurer. He went on to reveal a shocking truth that left both Sanaa and Selena bewildered. Egel had once harbored a deep-seated aversion toward both women and slaves. With a grave look taking over his face, he revealed the painful reason behind that hatred, stating bluntly that Egel had been betrayed. The painful truth was finally laid bare, revealing that the betrayal had come from the very slave who was Egel's first love. High above the sprawling rooftops of the capital, a quiet tale from the past began to unfold. There was once a young girl working as a maid for a prominent noble family, who quickly formed a tight bond with the young Egel. Though he had quietly fallen in love with her, she suddenly vanished without a trace before he ever had the chance to confess how he felt. Determined to become someone worthy of her when they met again, he threw himself into relentless combat training, eventually becoming a full-fledged adventurer by age 15. Years of fierce battles paid off when, as an adult, he unexpectedly crossed paths with her once more in the field. Seeing her familiar presence after all that time brought back every unsaid word he had carried since childhood. Joining together to travel on adventures, he repeatedly attempted to open his heart to her, yet nervousness always tied his tongue at the crucial second. Their delicate relationship continued in this uncertain state until they decided to take on a hazardous quest into a deadly, abandoned castle domain. He sat across from his companion in the tavern, resolute in his decision to take on the dangerous contract despite her warnings about their current rank. Driven by a quiet hope, he silently resolved that once the quest was successfully cleared, he would finally confess his true feelings to her. Under a heavy downpour, the newly formed party set out toward the ancient, towering castle looming over the city skyline. The battle within the ruins quickly turned brutal, painting the stone walls with crimson as he fought through the relentless onslaught. Driving his blade straight into the heart of a giant beast, he pushed his physical limits to protect his allies amidst the chaos of combat. Heavy breaths echoed through the hall as the giant fell, his comrades catching their breath and agreeing to return once the rain eased. Without warning, a quiet murmur of apology cut through the silence, followed by a violent strike that sent him tumbling backward. Plunging down a dark vertical chute, his desperate cries echoed off the walls while the woman he cherished cold-heartedly watched him fall. Landing hard on the flooded stone below, he opened his eyes to find a horde of shadowy demons surrounding him, realizing the bitter truth of her bondage. Lying helpless in the cold mud, he broke into hysterical, hollow laughter, crushed by the realization that he had fallen in love with a puppet. As he stood watch over the recovery room, the wounded young man on the bed suddenly snapped his eyes open in shock and realization. Bandaged and clutching his aching head, the injured warrior burst into tears, declaring that he would never trust anyone again after experiencing such bitter betrayal. Yet, looking up, he noticed a quiet silhouette sitting by his bedside, prompting him to ask where he was as his memories slowly came flooding back. The mysterious swordsman acknowledged the immense pain and hardship the young man had endured, leaning in slightly as his dark outline framed the dim room. Challenging the boy's cynical resolve, he questioned whether it wouldn't be far more noble to trust and accept the risk of betrayal, rather than living a life guarded by preemptive suspicion. Extending a hand of fellowship, he offered the youth a new purpose, telling him to come and lend his aid as soon as his injuries had healed. Remembering that pivotal encounter, the young warrior recalled how the formidable Sword King had arrived to protect a helpless village surrounded by a monstrous horde, efficiently clearing the threat alongside him. Perched atop a towering mountain of slain beasts with his sword resting on his shoulder, the legendary fighter stood absolute and undefeated amidst the carnage. Stunned by such overwhelming strength, the young man praised his companion's effortless victory over the creature horde, marveling at how easily he accomplished what had nearly cost him his own life. Staring at the muscular back of the warrior walking ahead of him, he realized how narrow and petty his own view of the world had been before meeting him. Returning together to the village, the grateful townsfolk rushed to welcome their savior back with warm cheers, though the modest champion humbly downplayed his heroics. He was offered food by a warm-hearted villager who urged him to eat, reminding him of how he always protected their home. He reflected quietly on how suddenly his perspective had begun to shift. Taking a bite of the crisp fruit, he realized that despite the looming threat of future betrayal, his genuine desire was simply to safeguard the community. Looking out at the radiant, thankful smiles surrounding him, he declared the meal delicious and chose to place his trust in them once more. Jessendorf sat comfortably on the sofa as he concluded his tale, explaining how Egil continued to fight off dangerous monsters, safeguard the local villages, and eventually achieve the prestigious S-rank status. Selena and Sanaa listened intently as Jessendorf recounted how Egil had taken them in without hesitation, even after suffering such immense hardship in his own past. He then earnestly asked the two women to become Egil's pillars of support, offering them his heartfelt thanks as they quietly accepted the duty. Later that evening at the estate, Selena soaked in a quiet bath, weighing Jessendorf's words and reflecting on how Egil chose to trust others despite betrayal. She rises from the warm bath water, her mind finally settled on a course of action. She knows that to truly build trust with Egil, she must first open her heart and speak with him honestly. Moments later, dressed in a delicate nightgown, she makes her way to his quarters, catching him off guard as she enters. Blushing deeply, she openly asks if she may spend the night with him, offering her full devotion and willingness to accept whatever. Standing in the quiet corridor, the young maid resolved to take the initiative and step forward in her bond with him tonight. As she contemplated her resolve, her close companion approached to ask if she truly intended to visit his room. With a warm smile, her friend reassured her, expressing her full support and treasuring the deep bond they shared. She then offered a playful tease that sent a crimson blush across her face, leaving her flustered. Offering a gentle good night, her companion departed, leaving her alone with her quiet determination. Stepping through the doorway into his bedchamber, She startled him as he reclined upon his bed. Sitting up, he greeted her, mentioning that her timing was ideal since he also needed to discuss something important. He went on to explain that while he had acquired intelligence on the perpetrators of her painful past, her status as a non-adventurer meant she might have to stay behind in safekeeping when they set out, leaving her stunned. Determined not to be separated from them, she passionately declared her resolve to become an adventurer herself. As her words lingered in the air, the white-haired noblewoman nervously clutched her dress, softly asking if she could accompany them on their journey. He immediately reassured her, promising that he would be glad to have her along and that Eleanor would be equally thrilled. Encouraged by his warm response, she tried to gather her courage, steeling herself to convey what was truly on her heart. Noticing her hesitation, he gently prompted her, asking what it was she had wished to discuss. With cheeks flushing bright red, she finally gathered her bravery and confessed that she had fallen in love with him. He stared back in utter shock, astonished by her sudden confession given her deep-seated fear of men. Sitting beside him on the edge of the bed, she admitted that while she still harbored a fear of other men, he was the sole exception to whom her heart belonged. Her lips parted as she began to whisper a far more daring wish for their future together. Overwhelmed by emotion, she blurted out a passionate plea, begging him to love both her body and heart just as he did with Eleanor. The outburst left him completely speechless and wide-eyed. Blushing deeply himself, he turned slightly away and acknowledged her beauty, admitting that he too had grown fond of her if she was truly willing to accept him. She gasped in mild surprise at his candid admission. Relief washed over her, and she suddenly burst into a quiet giggle, prompting him to ask in flustered embarrassment if he had said something absurd. She playfully teased him, noting how childish he had just looked. While he mumbled a mild protest, her expression softened into a sweet smile as she confided that his charming innocence was precisely one of the things she adored about him. Seeking final confirmation, he asked if she was truly comfortable sharing a bed with him, to which she gently reached out, asking if he would simply hold her hand for the night. She held his fingers tightly in the quiet dark, deriving comfort from the gentle heat of his palm against hers. Lying side by side beneath the sheets, Egil assured her that she could speak up if fear overtook her, but Selena quietly reassured him that she felt safe, noting how warm his hand was. Memories of her younger sisters drifted through her mind, remembering how they used to sleep holding hands before being separated, leaving her hopeful for a night free of nightmares. Glancing down in shock, Selena gasped at the obvious truth of Eleanor's words, while Egil stammered in embarrassment, frantically trying to explain away his involuntary physical response. Crawling onto the bed without hesitation, Eleanor offered to take care of his condition immediately, paying no mind to Selena's frantic protests. Outside the quiet estate, night swallowed the frantic arguments echoing from the bedroom, where calls to simply sleep clashed with chaotic teasing. By the time morning sunlight filtered through the window, Egil lay awake in bed, completely exhausted between both women nestled against him. Teased gently by Eleanor about his sleepless night, Egil confessed that resting was impossible in such a situation, though he mused with a wry smile about the fortune of having beautiful women on either side. He listened in silence as she spoke tenderly, reassuring him that both she and Eleanor were the only ones who truly recognized his quiet charm. Acknowledging her gentle words, he expressed his own desire, admitting that he wished for both of them to remain by his side from now on. She leaned in closer, whispering with soft conviction that no matter what happened in the future, her place would always be beside him. Beside them, the sleeping maid stirred restlessly, tightly grasping the sheets and talking in her sleep about keeping boundaries. As morning light flooded the room, he realized how late it had gotten, while the white-haired beauty quietly suggested staying in bed a little longer. He admitted helplessness, trapped beneath both of them and unable to shift an inch without disturbing their delicate sleep. The combat training yields impressive results as Egil cuts through a horde of monstrous goblins with effortless precision. He commends his companions for mastering the basics so quickly, noting how much they have improved in just 2 weeks. Eleanor turns toward Egil with genuine gratitude, insisting that her rapid growth is entirely thanks to his patient instruction. Meanwhile, Selena quietly looks on from nearby, her eyes fixed on them. She admits her jealousy, wishing she could also receive Egil's direct swordsmanship training. In response, he adjusts Eleanor's stance, pointing out a flaw in her posture before offering to demonstrate his most powerful technique. Calmly clears his throat and suggests it is time to wrap up training and return, while Livia defensively insists that she is purely focused on the task without any ulterior motives, much to Selena's amusement. Meanwhile, lurking in the shadows outside, Gorgias watches their movements closely. He reveals that he has picked up the trail of Eleanor's targets and discovered that the group has taken on a high-stakes quest to assault his very fortress. Back inside, an acquaintance discusses the specifics of the contract, explaining that an A-rank mission like the Gorgias raid normally requires official guild membership. However, Egil points out that since the leadership of the guild has changed, standard protocols might no longer apply. The young man offers a solution, explaining that since joining the guild directly isn't an option, he can introduce them to a trusted friend and arrange for them to take the request directly from a client. He introduced his acquaintance, Haruto Soares, as the official quest issuer to Egil's party, though the armored warrior immediately voiced his doubt, questioning whether a man traveling with women could handle such a dangerous task. Bluntly declaring his disdain for the weak, the heavily built warrior scoffed at the group, but Egil remained completely unbothered, calmly pressing him on whether that was truly his definitive judgment. Demanding to know their credentials, the client sneered and labeled them small fries, prompting Eleanor to state her C-rank status and Selena to reveal her E-rank, which only further fueled his condescension. Realizing the embarrassing oversight, the young guild contact cringed in the background as he remembered he had neglected to inform the client of the swordsman's true identity beforehand. Calmly stepping forward, he stated his name as Egil Volts and revealed without a hint of arrogance that he held the coveted S rank. Shocked to his core by the unexpected announcement, the arrogant client's eyes widened in disbelief, his jaw dropping as the weight of Egil's prestigious rank registered. Sliding a beverage across the table to confirm the truth, the light-haired ally assured the stunned warrior that he was indeed face-to-face with the renowned hero. Instantly abandoning his pride, the client grabbed Egil's hand in an enthusiastic grip, effusively declaring himself a massive admirer and expressing immense gratitude that an S-rank adventurer had taken his request. Amused by his dramatic shift in behavior, Eleanor and Selena shared a quiet chuckle over how effortlessly Egil's reputation commanded respect, before shifting focus back to the contract. With the introductions concluded, Egil requested the complete details regarding the fortress of Gorgias, prompting the client to explain that the quest originated from King Felestina to reclaim lost territory, though a major complication remained. He listened in silence as the armored client revealed a grim truth. A traitor lurked within the ranks of this quest. Clenching his fist in frustration, the client explained that 3 of his comrades had already been slain, raising fears that an unknown killer was systematically hunting down fellow adventurers. Analyzing the fallen warrior's injuries, the client deduced there must be at least 3 traitors involved, as the wounds were inflicted by arrows, magic, and weapons that only humans could wield, ruling out any possibility of a monster attack. Overcome with painful memories of his 3rd companion being struck down by an axe, the distressed warrior formally issued his true request to hunt down and eliminate the traitors. When questioned about inspecting guild cards or matching weapon types, the client admitted that although members were checked, fear of suspicion prevented anyone from revealing their true professions, completely stymieing the investigation. Recognizing that the situation had become far too convoluted for mere words to resolve, the dark-haired strategist accepted that their only option was to dive straight into the danger. With the plan set, the client and his allies departed to arrange carriages and supplies for the journey, instructing the group to wait until everything was prepared. Left alone, he realized that undertaking this covert mission provided the perfect opportunity to draw closer to the targets of Eleanor's vengeance. Joined by his companions, the imposing warrior cautioned that confronting an enemy hidden among their own ranks posed a far greater threat than facing any beast. Turning to his allies, he sternly advised the 2 young women to remain vigilant of their surroundings and strictly stay by his side no matter what occurred. She stammered in mild embarrassment at his stern warning, offering a hesitant nod of agreement, while Selena teasingly offered to sleep right beside him in his sleeping bag. Flustered, Egil quickly clarified that he had meant no such thing, just as Haruto confirmed the group was fully prepared to set out. Moments later, the party donned matching white hooded cloaks to obscure their features before stepping out toward an awaiting carriage. Haruto looked them over inquisitively, asking why they were concealing their faces for the journey. The young guild associate stepped forward to explain that because other parties remained completely unaware of the deaths among Haruto's colleagues, keeping their identities hidden was a necessary precaution. He warned that if the perpetrators realized the trio had survived, they would immediately become prime targets once more. Adjusting her hood, Eleanor silently relished the concealment. She resolved to keep her identity hidden until the absolute perfect moment to exact her long-awaited revenge finally arrived, while Egil observed her quiet determination. With everything in place, Haruto mounted the driver's seat and gave the signal to depart. The wheels began to churn over the cobblestones as their companion offered a final wave of farewell from the street. After a long journey, the massive stone battlements of Goria's fortress finally rose into view against the horizon. Looking out from their carriage at the formidable stronghold, Egil and his companions realized they had finally reached the threshold of their dangerous mission. Under the night sky, Haruto voiced his concern about the danger of sleeping in a separate shelter, but the girls quickly assured him there was no need to worry on Egil's account, playfully implying he was more than capable of handling himself. Hearing their teasing comments, the young strategist buried his burning face beneath his hood, overwhelmed with embarrassment as his companions smiled softly beside him, deciding not to push his composure any further. Directing their steps toward a massive white pavilion, Haruto urged the group onward, noting that the representatives for the guild council had already gathered within its illuminated interior. Stepping through the entrance flap, they found themselves greeted by an oppressive wave of heat and noise, as dozens of seasoned adventurers squeezed shoulder to shoulder inside the cramped, overflowing pavilion. Among the crowded throng, a troop of heavily armed women called out in greeting, their leader Fabiola stepping forward with a smirk to ask if Haruto intended to take part once again. Annoyed by her provocative tone, Haruto retorted that he had no desire to take advice from her, though she simply dismissed his frustration with a cold reminder of his past failures. Observing the heated confrontation from a slight distance, Egil caught sight of a quiet, enigmatic woman whose calm and refined demeanor stood in stark, solitary contrast to the surrounding chaotic atmosphere. Before the argument could escalate any further, a gaunt, dark-haired warrior named Relic offered a seat to the newcomer, prompting Fabiola to mockingly taunt him about his lingering terror of a traitor, though Relic merely withdrew into tense silence. He watched silently as the guild leader trembled in sheer terror, stammering broken excuses under the mounting pressure. Before the confrontation could escalate, a boisterous laugh cut through the heavy air as Ferrell, the commander of Gale, swept aside the tent entrance and light-heartedly mocked the somber mood. Caught off guard by his sudden entry, the pair turned to see the large warrior motioning for them to hurry inside and take their places. Stepping into the main gathering area, they spotted Sana and Luna standing together amidst the crowd as other commanders declared that time was running short. Exuding imposing authority, X-Vane stood sternly at the front of the Felestina chivalric order, his fully armored knights assembled behind him as he called the council to order. Surrounding the central stage were leaders of other prestigious groups, including Ringin of the Serpent's Dream and Michaela of the Treasure Sword, signaling the official start of the meeting. Scanning the surrounding faces, Livia whispered softly that their expected allies did not appear to have arrived yet. The council quickly devolved into bitter strife as leaders argued fiercely over the punishing difficulty of the mission, rejecting any notion of mutual camaraderie. Accusations flew across the room as one representative reminded the council that they were operating under royal decree, accusing opportunistic leaders of undermining their fellow mercenaries just to inflate rewards. Unable to tolerate the hypocrisy, she stepped forward boldly and publicly denounced the self-serving commander for betraying comrades and trading in slave labor, ignoring her partner's frantic attempts to keep her quiet. Her eyes widened in sudden recognition as her gaze locked onto the new arrivals, a painful shock running through her. A flamboyant mercenary party strode into the tent, led by a petite girl with twin tails who casually apologized for their tardiness and introduced herself as the leader of Sunset's Bond. An older veteran scoffed at her entrance, warning that a gathering of guild masters was no place for children. She immediately took offense, arguing that at 15 she was plenty mature, though he dismissively brushed her off and told her to run along home. Her face darkened into a terrifying, sinister smile as her eyes flashed with malice, openly threatening to prove her superior strength if he dared to challenge her. Startled by her sudden viciousness, the warrior backed down nervously while her comrades quickly intervened, reminding her that they had explicit orders to avoid picking fights. Observing the spectacle quietly from beneath his hood in the back of the tent, Egil noted to himself that the party's reckless attitude had not changed at all. Beside him, the hooded girl stared directly at Mordred, Muslin, and Kurd, silently naming the former companions who had heartlessly betrayed her and sold her to slave traders. A whirlwind of painful disbelief consumed her mind as she watched them laugh together, realizing they had completely moved on without a shred of remorse. Tears of sorrow and burning resentment welled in her eyes as she branded their actions unforgivable, struggling desperately to suppress the urge to strike them down on the spot. Observing his former companions laughing together in the distance, Egil burned with a quiet, furious resentment over how easily they had forgotten him. Noticing his brewing anger, Eleanor clenched her cloak in shared indignation, though he gently instructed her to remain calm. Nearby, the armored commander called the gathered guilds to attention to detail the upcoming operation, while Livia offered a quiet apology for her earlier distress. The strategy called for a synchronized charge through all 4 gates in pairs, a maneuver intended to flush out any hidden traitor in their ranks. Assessing the gathered forces, they reasoned that the newcomer guild known as Treasure Sword was unlikely to harbor the traitor, given their status as first-time participants. Unease lingered over the southern gate where their former allies were stationed, but with preparations complete, they resolved to move forward into position. Reaching the designated gate, they were greeted by Michaela, the leader of Treasure Sword, who proudly introduced her vanguard comrades Argo, Wei, and Holland. Exchanging firm handshakes and brief greetings, the frontline fighters confirmed their roles as they prepared to spearhead the assault. He gestured toward the hooded newcomers and questioned who they were, but the dark-haired youth calmly replied that they reserved the right to keep their occupation secret. Though questions remained regarding the marks left along the route, the companions agreed that clarity would come soon enough as they ventured deeper into the corridors. Inscriptions etched into the stone revealed the internal structure of the fortress, mapping 3 distinct sectors beyond the outer gates leading toward the inner hold. As they walked, the long-haired companion asked why he felt the need to hide their true classes, to which he explained that revealing his unique class without acting as leader would cause unnecessary friction. A harsh screech echoed down the hallway as goblins ambushed the party, prompting the young strategist to urge caution while they monitored for potential traitors. With snarls of rage, the grotesque monsters charged forward with raised clubs and rusted blades. The frontline fighters charged into battle with resounding shouts, while the gray-haired girl turned to ask if their own group should join the attack. Raising a hand to restrain them, he advised patience, explaining that he intended to test their combat synchronization alongside the frontline warrior first. Steel clashed against bone as the armored vanguard repelled the goblin assault, providing cover for his backline spellcaster as she prepared her magic. Observing the flow of battle from behind, the group pondered how a sudden tactical position switch would disorient both their enemies and unsuspecting allies. He outlined the upcoming tactic, instructing his companions to coordinate their strikes to disrupt the enemy line while telling Eleanor to wait safely behind. As the two charged forward side by side, he reminded her to rely on the combat lessons he had imparted, bolstering her confidence as she voiced her lingering hesitation. Flushing with determination, she affirmed her complete faith in his guidance as they closed the distance to the vanguard. Meanwhile, Haruto and his frontline ally lunged into the goblin horde, holding the monster's attention with aggressive strikes. Seizing the opening created by their allies, Egil issued the signal, leaving the remaining wave to Selena as the goblins reacted in confusion. Executing the technique, she lunged forward with fluid precision, severing the monster before it could adjust its guard. Channeling the sword art taught to her, she spun through the air in a sweeping arc, unleashing the emptiness round dance to clear the surrounding beastmen. The heavy warriors looked on in total disbelief at the high-level technique executed by an E-rank adventurer, while Egil commended her rapid mastery under pressure. Standing over the fallen beasts, he reminded her of his promise to cover her back should any danger slip past her defense. With a confident smirk, he assured her that he would never let her down, leaving her visibly touched by his unwavering trust. He watched as Livia turned her head away with flushed cheeks, softly muttering under her breath that his seamless coordination with Selena felt almost like foul play. Seeing their lively rapport, Eleanor giggled at how much fun they seemed to be having. As the party prepared to press forward, the young leader suggested keeping their current combat arrangement, though he gently cautioned Eleanor that such aggressive frontline tactics might not suit her style. Pouting slightly, she asserted her resolve to fulfill her role as vanguard, while Haruto eagerly affirmed the order. With their dungeon run drawing to a close, the party exited through the heavy stone gates of the fortress as the sun began to dip behind the distant castle spires. Walking back together under the evening sky, the group commended their improving teamwork. The swordsmen reflected silently on the peaceful resolution of the day, relieved that the suspected traitor within their ranks had made no overt moves. Yet a quiet doubt lingered in his mind as night settled over the camp, where empty sake bottles lay discarded beside a secluded tent. Moments later inside the dimly lit tent, he was caught completely off guard when a thoroughly intoxicated Eleanor tumbled heavily into his lap, breathlessly calling out his name. Positioned directly over him with glassy, tear-filled eyes and a deeply flushed face, she demanded to know what he truly felt toward her, emboldened by the alcohol. Selena directly confronts Egil, demanding to know why he has not shared the same intimacy with her as he has with others. He calmly explains that he refrained out of consideration, believing she was still harboring a lingering fear of men. Overhearing the exchange, Eleanor interjects, chiding her master for ignoring the young woman's feelings and pointing out how watching their daily intimacy has awakened a deep desire within her. As the conversation continues, Egil ponders in silence how she ended up in such a state, gazing down at a mysterious bottle that triggered this unexpected change. A few hours earlier, as the group leaves the fortress covered in the blood and sweat of vanquished monsters, the longing for a soothing bath fills their thoughts. Along the path, Eleanor's eyes light up as she spots a harmless white rabbit in the tall grass, prompting Selena to anxiously ask if the creature might bite. Before anyone can move closer, the small creature hops away into the brush, leaving Eleanor to admire how adorable it was while Egil teasingly asks if she is simply bad with animals. She softly admits her apprehension as they continue walking together. Shortly after, a friendly warrior offers Egil 2 large bottles of locally crafted spirits as a gesture of goodwill. Egil accepts the gift with gratitude, mentioning his plans to enjoy the liquor alongside his companions later that evening. Gathered around the table back at their quarters, Eleanor examines the bottles and recognizes the beverage as a traditional shochu similar to what her parents used to brew. Selena looks on curiously, admitting she has never tasted alcohol before and wondering if it tastes good. Teasing her companion, Selena mockingly questions how someone who is already 20 years old has yet to drink alcohol, calling her childish. Unfazed, Eleanor smirks and counters that she has already experienced the true taste of adulthood through her intimacy with Egil, smugly apologizing for bringing up Selena's own innocence. Flustered and deeply embarrassed by the sudden retaliation, Selena turns bright red and stammers to change the subject, urging everyone to start drinking. Egil quietly agrees and pours the spirits into their cups to ease the rising tension. Together, they raise their cups and gulp down the strong liquor, unaware of the profound and unexpected effect it will soon have on their desires. He watched quietly as Eleanor took another sip of the strong spirits. Her cheeks flushed bright red, while Selena playfully teased her about her growing drunkenness. Giggling softly under the influence of the liquor, Eleanor pleaded with Selena to keep her tipsy behavior a secret from him, lamenting her own lack of romantic progress. Deciding that enough was enough, Egil confiscated the bottle from their hands, declaring firmly that they were far too intoxicated and needed to get some rest. Overcome by emotion and liquid courage, Eleanor suddenly reached out, gazing directly into his eyes as she begged him to hold her close. Pouring her heart out, she confessed how deeply she loved him, recalling how he had transformed her life, given her a purpose, and taught her to stand up and fight. Gently embracing her, Egil acknowledged her subtle trembling and asked if she was truly ready to overcome her fear, while she internally vowed to take this long-awaited step forward. Leaning in until their lips nearly touched, he cautioned her to be certain of her decision, to which she passionately replied that she would never regret it. With their doubts cast aside, they shared an intimate, tender embrace in the quiet privacy of the tent. Moments later, Selena stirred awake and caught sight of their passion, teasingly whispering in surprise that Eleanor had finally taken the decisive leap. As Eleanor drifted into a peaceful sleep, Egil and Selena quietly stepped out of the tent into the starry night, continuing their conversation so as not to disturb her rest. Beneath a vast night sky brilliant with glittering stars, her soft cries of pleasure echoed across the serene landscape. As the party moved through the fortress corridors clad in hooded traveling cloaks, the young companion noted that their leader's growing strength would force the surrounding demons to adapt quickly, making refined tactical coordination essential for their survival. Continuing their quiet discussion under the shadow of their hoods, she added that careful timing would prevent their allies from drawing unnecessary demon attention during critical maneuvers, acknowledging the need for further practice. Their quiet dialogue was suddenly interrupted by an urgent summons directing everyone to gather immediately at the central meeting area, prompting the dark-haired swordsman to analyze the situation with accustomed composure. As the gathered forces assembled, a stern armored commander delivered a grim announcement. Fabiola had been ambushed and severely wounded, almost certainly by a traitor operating from within their own ranks. Murmurs of shock rippled through the crowd at the mention of treason, while a long-haired warrior woman explained to the commander that their unit was returning without incident until an unknown presence stirred in the shadows. She recounted how an impenetrable black fog had suddenly engulfed the corridor, followed by horrific screams. Once the darkness finally dissipated, Fabiola was discovered collapsed on the stone floor, bleeding profusely despite immediate medical intervention. Examining the nature of the phenomenon, a bespectacled companion confirmed that the mysterious black mist was not poisonous, but rather designed strictly to blind anyone caught inside it, leaving the commander to ponder the true origin of such magic. Reasoning through the clues, the hooded swordsman questioned whether anyone had caught sight of the attacker as the fog cleared, while a rugged, bearded warrior raised the possibility that the saboteur might be an outsider from another gate or someone standing among them. He listened quietly as accusations began to fly across the tent, with a panicked hooded man stuttering in defense, while an armed woman pointed back, claiming that others among them were far more suspicious under the slaver's control. The tension deepened as a bearded veteran interjected, pointing out that everyone present remained under suspicion given the murky circumstances surrounding the attack. Desperate to deflect blame, the flustered man insisted that the true culprit must possess a specialized class capable of striking from a great distance. Considering this theory, Selena noted that such a convenient ability would likely belong to an elite S-rank class, wondering if anyone present truly matched those rare conditions. The weight of her words hung over the gathering, evoking the unsettling idea of a formidable, high-ranking threat lurking beyond their current understanding. Realizing that arguing was getting them nowhere, the commander called an end to the late-night meeting, instructing everyone to rest while he determined their strategy for the coming morning. Stepping out into the cool night air outside the encampment, Egil walked beside Haruto, asking if he believed the traitor would strike again using the mystical black fog. Analyzing the enemy's pattern, Egil observed that while previous attacks targeted isolated individuals, the black fog enabled bold strikes even within groups, warning that they must stay on high alert. When asked directly for his own thoughts on the black fog, Haruto grew visibly tense, offering a vague response before abruptly taking his leave for the night. As Egil and the women agreed that Haruto was clearly hiding something, a familiar rabbit suddenly appeared before them, speaking with a mysterious voice that bade Egil to come alone to the lake. He stood frozen alongside his companions, stunned into silence by the impossible realization that the small creature had just spoken aloud. Despite his allies voicing immediate concern about a potential trap, he remained resolute, dismissing the threat of a weak opponent and choosing to follow the mysterious summons into the night. Guiding him through the quiet night, the small creature hopped along the water's edge, leading the hooded swordsman toward a secluded meeting point far from the encampment. Arriving at a flickering campfire along the lake, he pulled back his hood to confront the figure waiting in the shadows, instantly recognizing her connection to Fabiola. The young woman greeted him warmly by his full title, revealing that controlling the rabbit was a taming skill she had used to conceal her presence, while introducing her small white companion as Elizabeth. Revealing her face clearly in the firelight, she formally introduced herself as Fai Shilyuz, a 16-year-old girl bound by a restrictive collar around her neck. When he demanded to know why she had summoned him, she boldly proposed replacing her current master with him, asking that he take responsibility for providing for her future. Perplexed by her sudden offer, he questioned how a slave could simply abandon her owner, but she calmly countered that she possessed the knowledge to break her own collar and believed her prospects would be far better under his care. She explained that Fabiola had sent her to investigate Haruto's suspicious guild dealings, leading Egil to deduce that she was no ordinary servant, but rather a former S-rank adventurer working in secret. Challenged on why she would seek a new master instead of living freely once unchained, she merely sighed in annoyance, admitting that living independently sounded far too troublesome for her liking. She lay comfortably on the ground beside her rabbit, lazily expressing her distaste for work and musing on how convenient it was that slaves receive food without having to labor for it. Observing her defenseless posture, he pointed out that an abusive master like Fabiola would still have mistreated her regardless. She continued, explaining that members of the guild detested intimacy with Fabiola, whereas Eleanor appeared genuinely happy beside him the previous day. Pondering what love truly meant and whether her own body held value, she left him flustered and thoroughly red-faced. Dismissing those heavy thoughts with a soft sigh, she simply asked if he would be willing to take responsibility and provide for her instead. Gazing into the campfire while holding a roasted corn cob, he realized that leaving her to wander alone would only lead to her being exploited or harmed by someone far worse. Reaching a firm decision, he extended the warm ear of corn toward her with a bright smile, offering to accept her into his care. Instantly, she and her little rabbit lunged forward in delight, greedily snatching the treat straight from his hand. Happily chewing on the sweet corn, she praised his kindness and promised to share a valuable piece of secret information in return, immediately catching his interest. Munching away contentedly, she dropped a bombshell. She claimed to know the exact identity of the traitor inside their organization, leaving him stunned by the depth of her intelligence. With 3 of the allied guilds already wiped out during the expedition, the remaining leaders reviewed the grim list of casualties. The commander extended his solemn gratitude to those who still chose to stand and press forward despite the mounting peril. As the commander questioned whether she was truly comfortable remaining alongside the survivors after the tragic loss of another group, Eleanor quietly reaffirmed her decision, accepting the unsettling reality of their situation. Suddenly, the young hooded swordsman interrupted the discussion, declaring that a traitor lurked within their ranks and refusing to fight alongside someone capable of betrayal. His blunt accusation caught the commander off guard, who questioned why they should abandon pair assignments when their numbers were already severely depleted. Supporting his point, she raised her hand and agreed that forcing members together under suspicion would only breed panic, advocating instead that each party act independently according to their own goals. Joining the debate, the heavily built warrior emphasized that capable adventurers should be able to safeguard themselves and take necessary risks, while his companion quietly observed the underlying motives of the remaining groups. Conceding to their arguments, the commander finalized the decision, declaring that every guild would operate independently from that moment on as he offered them a stern farewell. Shortly thereafter, the soft-spoken tamer stepped forward with her fluffy companion in tow, politely introducing herself to the group. Surprised by her sudden presence, the warrior questioned why a member of another faction was joining them, only to learn that her exceptional tracking skills as a tamer were precisely what they needed to hunt down the traitors. While she looked on quietly, Eleanor questioned Haruto about whether he would disclose their previous conversation, but he assured her it was unneeded before Egil advised caution. Fi politely introduced herself, welcoming her as a reliable ally now that the treasure sword was gone, while Haruto secretly contemplated the risks of exposing the traitor's true identity to Egil, fearing how deeply it might distress him. Gazing intently at Eleanor, Fi caused her to shift uncomfortably under the silent scrutiny. Recalling her past encounter with Egil at the lake, Haruto observed the subtle smirk on her face and immediately questioned her odd reaction, shifting the subject to ask if she knew the locations of the other guilds. Explaining that her familiar, Phoenix, was monitoring the area from high above, she detailed the positions of the other guilds, reporting that Panacea guarded the eastern gate, Felistina's order and Ferrell held the south, and Sunset's Bond was making their advance through the west. With their route mapped out, Egil declared their goal for the day was to reach the second gate, prompting the party to pick up their pace through the narrow passageway, where an ambush would leave them vulnerable. Steel-willed and resolute, she quietly admitted her desire to reunite with her friends, determined to reach them before any harm befell the trio, and robbed her of the chance to speak with them again. Suddenly blocking their path stood a group of goblins, but before the creatures could act, Haruto casually dismissed them as a mere nuisance and unleashed his endless sword technique. In an instant, a violent flurry of blades sliced through the air, instantly obliterating the monsters blocking the corridor in a flash of dark blood and force. Stepping over the freshly slain remnants of the beast horde without breaking stride, the group pressed onward through the narrow, blood-splattered dungeon halls. Arriving swiftly at the heavy stone entryway, they recognized the threshold leading outside and hurried toward the exit. He led the group into the inner ruins near the second gate, where ancient stone structures that once served as soldier dormitories lined the narrow street. Before they could advance further, distressing reports arrived indicating that traitors had suddenly manifested at both the eastern and southern gates, sparking fears that this area would be targeted next. As they stood on high alert, a dense, swirling black fog erupted around them, completely enveloping the party and trapping them in a murky darkness. Recognizing the ominous mist, the massive warrior cried out in horror, identifying it as the signature heavy fog of their comrade Leonardo, while his dark-cloaked companion calmly pressed him on whether the magic truly looked familiar. He desperately rejected the thought of Leonardo betraying them, though the swordsman confirmed that this atmospheric magic indeed belonged to a weather master. Delivering a cold reality check, the dark-haired youth revealed that Leonardo was already dead, causing his large ally to collapse to his knees in despair. He further clarified that Leonardo had been slain 2 weeks ago by the real traitors, who were now weaponizing his lingering abilities. Recalling a quiet moment around a campfire from earlier in their journey, he remembered how Eleanor had asked if he knew who the traitor was, and how he had admitted to having deduced half the truth. During that night, the young tamer had pointed out that the victim's wounds were caused by human job skills, raising questions about whether a human or a monster was behind it. She concluded that since job powers are strictly unique to humans, the traitor operating among them must undeniably be a living human being. She contemplated the horrifying possibility of a creature utilizing a human job's power, a feat previously thought impossible. Eleanor clarified that while monsters were doing the actual attacking, someone behind the scenes was pulling their strings, leading Haruto to conclude that the true traitor was bestowing power upon specific beasts to ambush the party. Gently stroking her small beast companion, Fi agreed that the culprit was almost certainly a superior tamer, though she harbored further doubts. Haruto pointed out that an ordinary tamer could only command lower-tier monsters, whereas the creatures they faced were vastly superior, leading him to the grim realization that the traitor was, like him, an S-rank adventurer. Overwhelmed by sudden horror and confusion, Haruto falls into a desperate panic, convinced that he is being targeted out of vengeance for being the sole survivor. Surrounding voices desperately plead with him to calm down amidst the creeping darkness. Tears stream down his face as he collapses under the crushing weight of guilt, weeping over his inability to protect those around him. Meanwhile, panic spreads through the blinding shroud as the companions try to call out to one another, realizing that he has lost his vision entirely. As they call out to check on one another through the murky haze, the women discover that nearly all of them have been rendered completely blind by the unnatural mist, leaving them disoriented and vulnerable. Realizing the danger of their shared blindness, the young swordsman urges Eleanor to summon the sacred beast of the wind to blow away the magical haze. Taking a deep breath, she begins to chant an ancient invocation, calling upon the Holy Spirit to cleanse the darkness. Responding to her plea, a magnificent avian beast composed of pure swirling currents materializes in a blinding flash of light, encircling her in a roaring tempest. Controlling the beast with precision, she commands it to release a soft, gentle breeze rather than a destructive gale so as not to harm her companions. Under the subtle gust, the thick mist swiftly dissolves, restoring their sight. With the air finally clear, the group scans the plaza only to freeze in shock. The distressed youth has completely vanished from where he once stood. Noticing her familiar's reaction, she listens as the magical creature reveals that he panicked and sprinted back in the direction from which they had arrived. Fearing for his fragile mental state, she dispatches the familiar to track him and ensure his safety, before turning to her companions to question if anyone caught a glimpse of the enemy who conjured the blinding fog. She stood alongside her companions in the empty street, reflecting on the monster they had just encountered, an ogre of immense power, and wondering why it had targeted them specifically. Fi reasoned that the beast had likely come seeking Egil and was probably another S-rank entity, while Haruto quietly concluded that the enemy was already aware of his presence. Observing that the other guilds were seeking shelter within nearby houses to evade further attacks, the group agreed that as the sun set, they too should head indoors to rest and allow Eleanor time to restore her mana. Feigning dizziness from her recent spellcasting, Eleanor dramatically asked to be carried, provoking instant outrage and flat refusal from her companions who told her to walk on her own. Unfazed by their reaction, she offered a playful chuckle, while Haruto looked at her with quiet resignation. As night settled completely over the silent settlement, the full moon bathed the desolate buildings in a pale, quiet glow. Inside one of the abandoned structures, Eleanor stood alone at a window, gazing thoughtfully out into the dark night. Her solitary reverie was suddenly shattered by the sharp creak of a floorboard behind her, startling her immediately. Haruto approached her, pointing out how she had been putting on a cheerful front for the others while hiding a troubled expression, asking if she was still anxious about meeting her childhood friends. Reflecting silently in her heart, Eleanor cherished the comforting presence of Selena and her companion, realizing how truly blessed this quiet time together had been. She spoke softly in the quiet night, confessing the deep anxieties weighing on her and Selena about their shared past and uncertain future. Tearful and overwhelmed, she admitted that being separated from Egil-sama was the single outcome they feared above all else. Moved by her vulnerability, he pulled her into a firm embrace and pressed his lips against hers, silencing her tears with a passionate kiss. As their lips parted, soft and breathless gasps filled the quiet room, signaling the rising heat between them. Looking deep into her eyes, he apologized for causing her distress and vowed that no matter what occurred, he would never leave her to face her burdens alone. High above the city, a winged creature cut across the sky, heralding a sudden and coordinated assault against the town's perimeter. Inside the safe house, urgent reports arrived revealing that the guilds stationed at the other gates were once again coming under heavy attack by ogres. Hearing this grim update, he rallied his companions, emphasizing that both Eleanor's targets and the endangered twins needed immediate rescue. Meanwhile, down at the southern gate, chaos was already unfolding as wounded defenders collapsed on the stone floor while screams echoed through the air. Towering monstrous fiends crushed through the defenses, leaving the surrounding guards paralyzed with fear at the sheer scale of the ambush. Over at the western gate, heavy boots rushed across the ground as the local garrison scrambled to reinforce their position. Facing the oncoming ogres, Cirilla anxiously looked around for Livia, realizing she was their only frontline fighter capable of countering such brute force. Realizing they were out of time, she turned to Kuro and ordered him to unleash his magic immediately to hold the monsters at bay. In response to her command, orb after orb of concentrated flame began manifesting in the air, crackling with destructive power. He launched a glowing sphere of fire straight into the front line of the advancing beast, calling out with early triumph as the blast detonated against its thick hide. However, his confidence shattered in an instant when the smoke cleared, leaving the monster completely unharmed. Before the young spellcaster could process the failure of his attack, the massive ogre swatted his companion aside with devastating force. The woman cried out in horror as her ally was sent crashing to the ground, coughing blood as she realized their weapons and magic could not even scratch the giant monsters. Cornered in a narrow stone passage, the desperate survivors backed into a blind wall, realizing with growing dread that there was no way out. The towering beasts closed in on them, blocking the light and sealing their fate in the dead end. As the giant raised its massive fist to deliver the final blow, the young woman's screams of despair echoed against the alley walls. Just as all hope vanished, a clear voice invoked a formidable technique, slicing through the air with instant lethality. Descending from above like a shadow, the black-clad warrior plunged into the fray, his dual blades tearing through the hide of the monstrous attackers. The giant ogres roared in confusion as the sudden newcomer cut through their ranks in a blur of violence. He landed fluidly before the stunned group, dark mantle settling around him after dealing a heavy strike to the beast behind him. In a lightning-fast display of swordplay, he executed a series of relentless slashes, carving through the remaining beasts before they could react. His swift, precise maneuvers left the massive monsters completely helpless against his overwhelming skill. As the giant beasts collapsed into pools of blood, the rescued adventurers looked on in sheer disbelief, expressing their profound gratitude for being saved from certain death. They marveled at his incredible strength, admitting they had never witnessed anyone fight with such formidable power. Stepping beside her companion, the blonde woman revealed her identity to the bewildered group, who instantly recognized her with shocked exclamations. Reunited at last, Haruto's companions gathered around the rescued squad, who questioned Eleanor about her unexpected presence and expressed relief that she was still alive after all this time. She offered a faint, serene smile, expressing her quiet satisfaction that they still remembered her as they stood face to face once more. The squad members laughed awkwardly in response, their nervous chuckles betraying their guilt, while her sharp gaze remained fixed upon them, noting how relieved she was that they were still among the living. Breaking the awkward stillness, Cirilla announced her intention to rush towards Sana and Luna, prompting Haruto to step forward and offer his assistance, eager to track them down and bring them back safely. With a swift nod, Haruto bolted into action, shouting back to Eleanor and her companions to stay close and return to his side as soon as the area was secured. Watching him charge ahead, Eleanor closed her eyes in quiet contemplation, filled with a newfound warmth as she realized she was no longer fighting in isolation. Reopening her eyes with unwavering resolve, her expression hardened as she vowed to put an end to all the turmoil for the sake of protecting the peace she had finally found. Sensing her resolute aura, Cirilla desperately pleaded for her to hear their explanation, insisting that they had not intended to betray her, which prompted Eleanor to coolly ask who had issued the command. As Cirilla hesitated, mentioning Misha's involvement, Eleanor calmly acknowledged that her suspicion was correct, recognizing her own sister's calculating hand behind the plot. Desperate for absolution, the squad explained that their families had been taken hostage, leaving them with no choice but to facilitate her sale to slave merchants, and they implored her to forgive them and reconcile. Processing their desperate plea with an unreadable expression, Eleanor slowly extended her gloved hand toward them, agreeing to make amends despite the lingering weight of their past betrayal. She urged them to lay down their weapons and join hands in a circle, inviting them to make peace just as they used to in the old days. Overwhelmed by her unconditional grace, the armored comrade released his weapon with an agonized cry. Softening her gaze, Cirilla gently pointed out that true friends had no need for steel when reconciling. The oppressive guilt that had weighed on the squad finally shattered into tears of profound relief. Unable to contain his emotions, Kuro cried out from the depths of his heart, overjoyed to be welcomed back. As Eleanor observed their tears, her gentle smile masked a bitter reflection on her sisters, who had remained cold and merciless actors in this deceit until the very end. As the hostile former allies rushed forward with weapons drawn, blade-wielding attackers lunged directly toward Eleanor with lethal intent. Before they could reach her, Cirilla boldly interceded, stepping directly into the path of the assault to shield her friend. Watching her former companions charge in with unrelenting malice, she felt no anger, only a strange sense of contentment. She was truly glad that they had remained the exact same cruel, irredeemable people until the very end, casting away any lingering doubts. Her blade clashed violently against the incoming assailant, locking weapons in a tense struggle. When the attacker furiously demanded to know who was interfering, she resolutely declared that she would not allow anyone to hurt Eleanor. Standing calmly behind her defender, she unleashed her formidable magic, invoking the power to summon a massive dragon woven entirely of roaring water. Capitalizing on the moment, the brave warrior delivered a powerful kick straight into her enemy, driving the attacker back and forcing distance between them. The violent struggle continued as their weapons clashed once more, the attacker snarling that this battle had nothing to do with an outsider like her. Enraged by the interference, he demanded that she get out of his way, but she firmly refused. She shouted back that she didn't care about his demands, driven by her single-minded desire to protect her best friend Eleanor's smile. Mocking her condition, the cruel warrior spat that she was merely a slave who needed to know her place. Refusing to let his insults break her spirit, she channeled all her strength and executed a decisive two-handed sword technique known as cross-cut. Striking with overwhelming force and fierce determination, her cross-slash tore cleanly through the opponent's defenses, commanding the enemy to fall to their knees as the decisive blow landed. She pressed her blade down with relentless force, completely unfazed by her opponent's furious sneers as he spat that she and Eleanor deserved to be crawling in the dirt. Refusing to give him a single second to recover, she drove a powerful kick into his midsection while holding his weapon at bay. As he reeled back in pain and shouted insults, she boldly declared that they would stand firm, push forward, and return safely to Egil. Without a moment of hesitation, her steel pierced through his collar, drawing a sharp spray of blood into the air. Choking on his own blood, the attacker collapsed, his eyes wide with the horrifying realization of his imminent death. Standing over her defeated foe, she solidified her resolve, knowing that hesitation meant losing everything and everyone she cared about. Across the quiet backdrop of the city, a quiet question lingered over the true motive behind this clash. Elsewhere, Eleanor made her disinterest in revenge perfectly clear to her companion, who simply adjusted his glasses and called anyone picking a fight foolish. Despite her peaceful words, the opposing mage unleashed a powerful blast of destruction across the terrain, convinced he had obliterated his target. Before he could celebrate, a crushing high kick shattered his defense, catching the spellcaster completely off guard. She mockingly taunted her opponent, pointing out that she was merely seizing a wide-open vulnerability after landing her kick. In response to her defiance, the enemy spellcaster gathered his mana and conjured a deadly barrage of ice needles to impale her. Rather than backing down, she surged forward with raw force, effortlessly shattering the sharp ice spells around her while declaring her intent to stand and fight. Shocked by this display of strength, he gaped in total disbelief as his strongest ice magic was obliterated in an instant. Before he could regain his composure, she summoned her avian companion Phoenix, sending the bird swooping directly into the mage's face to disorient him. With his attention caught off guard by the flying beast, she used the split-second distraction to close the distance at blinding speed. Capitalizing on his open posture, she unleashed her Moonwolf technique, battering his torso with a relentless flurry of strikes. With her foe helpless and reeling from the assault, she wounded back her fist to deliver a final, decisive blow. Delivering a devastating follow-up known as Gale Breaker, she slammed her strike into his body, shattering his spectacles and knocking him out cold. Standing over the vanquished opponent, she cast a cold, indifferent glare downward, dismissing him as completely beneath her notice before walking away. She stood silently as rain splashed against the cobblestones, the voice of her former ally echoing through the downpour to ask why she had finally returned after all this time. With a resolute expression, she met Cirilla's gaze and made her intentions clear, explaining that she had not returned to rejoin them, but had only come to bid a final farewell. High above the town within the royal palace, Eleanor recalled her upbringing as the king's daughter, forced from early childhood to interact with countless court figures. She had always felt a deep sense of dread surrounding her, forced to deal with aristocrats whose friendly expressions were nothing more than empty, superficial masks. She had genuinely believed that, upon joining her adventuring companions, she had finally met people with whom she could share authentic joy and laughter. She had trusted them as friends with whom she could lower her defenses and open her heart without fear of deceit. Her fragile trust was shattered forever on the tragic day they turned on her and clamped a cold, restrictive slavery collar around her neck. She wept bitterly as tears welled in her eyes, the humiliating collar a constant reminder of the betrayal by those she had considered her allies. As she wept, her former companion approached with a bitter, mockingly dramatic tone, asking if she had truly come just to offer a polite farewell. Tightening her grip on her weapon, the furious warrior bared her deep-seated malice, declaring her long-standing hatred for the princess's condescending attitude. Rushing backward through the air with acrobatic precision, she cast her magic spell, unleashing a violent surge of water into the arena. Eleanor explained that her intention had always been to grow alongside them rather than seek mere amusement, but her opponent retorted bitterly, refusing to accept defeat at the hands of a former royal who only played at adventuring while they struggled daily to earn a living. Admitting her dark intent with a sinister grin, she dropped into a low combat stance, boldly declaring that their party had always plotted ways to murder Eleanor all along. Vanishing in a sudden blur, she disappeared from sight, leaving Eleanor to recognize the high-speed movement technique known as runaway and realize the lethal malice behind the sudden blitz. Anticipating a backstab from the cover of shadows, Eleanor braced herself for an incoming strike targeted directly at her heart from behind. With cold confidence, the attacker thrust her dagger forward into the target, believing the fatal blow had successfully landed. Instead of striking flesh, her blade pierced a dark, swirling mass of water, triggering an instant counter-trap as the vortex burst open. The explosive water blast tore apart her armor and clothing, blowing her backward through the air with a frustrated grimace. Refusing to yield, she gripped her blade tightly against the overwhelming torrent, shouting in defiance for the surging spell to get out of her way. The full force of the elemental wave overpowered her completely, slamming her violently against the solid wall with a sharp, echoing scream. She coughed violently, spitting up liquid as the crushing force of the water attack slammed her onto the hard floor. Struggling to raise her head, she watched as Eleanor stood towering before her, framed by a massive serpent of water, coldly declaring that this was the end of their encounter. Glaring up through her disheveled hair, the defeated assassin vented her frustration at Eleanor's unyielding composure, infuriated by the familiar, calm expression that reminded her of their painful past. Her rage erupted into a frenzy as she recounted the betrayal she felt when sold to a slave merchant, accusing Eleanor of laughing at her despair, while Eleanor simply invited her to draw nearer. With a murderous shriek, she unsheathed a hidden dagger, committing every remaining drop of her strength into a desperate, final assault. Closing the distance instantly, she lunged forward to plunge the blade deep into Eleanor's chest, right under the shadow of the towering water dragon. Before the blade could pierce through, Eleanor voiced her solemn desire to shed her royal title and protect those she loved, surrounding her attacker in an inescapable, surging sphere of water. Overcome with intense emotion as the malice screamed around her, Eleanor poured her magical energy into crushing the lingering hatred of her former companion once and for all. As the violent magic gradually subsided, she gasped softly, releasing the tension in her shoulders as quiet restored itself to the air. Rejoining Selena and Phi beside the receding tide, Eleanor observed the fallen form of Cirilla, noting with grim certainty that her assailant had already perished. She stood frozen in the quiet after the violent surge, tears welling in her eyes as the reality of her deadly strike sank in, unable to understand why a heavy sorrow still weighed upon her heart. While her tears continued to fall, the sound of receding water echoed across the damp terrain. A short distance away, her dark-haired ally reasoned that her duel must be finished, only to be suddenly startled by the sound of frantic footsteps splashing in the puddles behind him. Before he could turn around completely, A distressed young girl stumbled directly into his chest, stammering an apology as he caught her shoulders to keep her from falling. Recognizing the frightened girl as Luna, he urgently asked where her companion Sana was, causing Luna to gasp in shock upon realizing who had caught her. With tears pouring down her cheeks and absolute terror in her eyes, she cried out desperately, pleading for immediate help to save Sana. As they navigated the quiet streets, young Luna anxiously questioned whether their father would be all right. Sana sternly reminded her that he had abandoned them at the first sign of danger, prioritizing his own escape over family. Though Luna worried about having left the knights behind as well, Sana insisted that keeping her younger sister safe was all that truly mattered. Reflecting on their plight, she recalled the silent oath she had made, convinced that abandoning their father was the only sensible choice. Her mind drifted back to her mother's deathbed, where the frail woman had gently held her hand, pleading with her to use her strength as the elder sister to always watch over Luna. Taking her mother's fragile hand in hers, she had solemnly agreed. With absolute resolve, she had vowed back then that no matter what obstacles lay ahead, she would protect Luna at all costs. The bitter memories burned further, bringing back the bitter argument with her father after discovering he had squandered their hard-earned quest reward on wine and women instead of buying medicine. When she had confronted him in outrage, he had merely dismissed her anger with a callous demand for silence. He had tried to pass off his negligence with pathetic self-pity, claiming that watching his wife suffer was equally agonizing for him. Disgusted by his utter lack of responsibility, she realized he was beyond redemption. As Luna questioned whether following him had been a tragic mistake, hoping only to afford their mother's remedy, a monstrous roar suddenly shattered the air. Before her sister could react, she shoved Luna away with all her strength, crying out for her to escape. In that instant, a heavy stone wall collapsed on top of her under the brute impact of the assault, sending her crashing onto the hard ground as she groaned in agony. Lying helpless on the ground beneath the rubble, she listened as her frantic sister realized the palace knights had already been slaughtered by the invading monsters. Desperate to ensure the girl's survival, she urged her to run, declaring that she would stay behind to hold off the monstrous horde alone. When her sister began to argue, she raised her voice with tearful intensity, ordering her to obey as her older sister and flee without delay. Watching her tearful sister finally turn and run to seek help, she braced herself against the towering shadows, knowing that if both perished, no one would be left to care for their dying mother. Turning to face the monstrous fiends head-on, she unleashed a blinding burst of sacred magic, striking the towering horde with holy energy. Leaping high into the air to draw their ire, she taunted the creatures, warning them to keep away from her gentle sister. Mid-flight, she gathered her radiant aura to cast a spell of healing, attempting to mend her injured body before continuing the fight. Before the magic could take effect, a brute lunged forward with devastating speed, forcing her to interrupt her chant and narrowly dodge the heavy blow. The monster's colossal fist slammed into the earth beside her, shattering the stone ground and sending shockwaves rippling through the air. Gasping heavily and sweating from exhaustion, she recognized the grim reality. The relentless beast would not give her time to chant, and a single direct hit meant certain death. She collapsed to the ground, utterly exhausted and lamenting her lack of strength as the massive demon brutes loomed over her. Clenching her trembling fist against the dirt, she took comfort in knowing she had at least bought enough time for Luna to escape safely. As one of the monstrous beasts pulled back its massive fist to deliver the final strike, her mind instinctively reached out to her mother in what felt like her last moment. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she smiled through the pain, proud that she had honored her promise to protect her younger sister. Just as she braced for the blow, a calm, unfamiliar voice commended her brave efforts, startling her out of her resignation. Stepping shielding in front of her, Haruto unleashed his endless sword technique, instantly skewering the brute force of monsters in a deadly flurry of blades. Looking up through blurriness and tears, she caught sight of the iconic cloak and wondered aloud if Egil's allies had arrived to save her. Glancing back over his shoulder with a calm smile, the young warrior reassured her that he had made it just in time. Turning to face her completely, he softly affirmed how well she had done, validating all the pain and terror she had endured alone. Unable to contain her intense wave of relief, she burst into desperate tears and buried her face in his chest as he held her securely. She collapses into Luna's waiting arms, tears of relief streaming down her cheeks as the two friends cling tightly to each other after surviving the harrowing ordeal. Turning his attention to the remnants of the beasts, Haruto addresses the enemy observing through them, calling out the traitor directly and demanding to know their true purpose in slaughtering innocent people. With fierce determination blazing in his eyes, he vows to put an end to the enemy's cruel games, warning the traitor that he will hunt him down and confront him personally.